What would happen if Deku had the Ghoul Quirk? Let's find out. But before we start, please hit the subscribe button, like the video if you like this story. Also consider sharing this with your friends, this really helps. Let's start. Detective Namasa almost trips when he first steps foot on what may as well be ground zero. Barriers that rival a prison's walls hid the devastation site well from the road, but beyond those gates, it's complete fallout. What must have once been business buildings are now leveled, rubble and wood in heaps or piles, that would be enough to turn the zone into a junkyard. A huge gaping hole in the ground grants access to a network of metallic hallways that run beneath it. No doubt, a team has already been dispatched to explore where those tunnels lead. However, what Namasa has to worry about is cleaning up what's on the surface. Waiting for the detective amidst the crime scene is the underground hero that called him here, the pro-hero Sir Night-Eye, who had been investigating the Yakuza as well, and surprisingly Toshinori, with an even more surprising fourth person. The latter is much younger than the others, but a blonde like Toshinori and certainly in the profession of hero work, judging by the red cape billowing behind him. Unsure of how long the group has been waiting for him, Namasa removes his hat to place over his chest in an apologetic gesture. I take it you've all already become acquainted with one another. The detective shoots a glance in Toshinori's direction that meets the blonde's eye. Once the two are locked onto each other, he briefly shifts his gaze to Aizawa, silently asking if he knows that he's All Might. Toshinori subtly shakes his head. I don't think you and I have had the pleasure yet. The younger of the bunch steps forward with his hand outstretched. Namasa returns the gesture, and the two shake in greeting. I'm Mirio Tagata. He then strikes a pose that practically screams power from the way his muscles flex, Lemillion. I believe you two will be working closely together in the future. Toshinori politely interjects by placing a hand on each of their shoulders. When Namasa looks into the blue of the number one hero's eyes, he can see the sincerity in that statement. Toshinori's smile is so soft and tender that it looks sheepish. Being a detective, Namasa reads between the lines. He realizes just who Tagata is, that he truly does represent the younger generation of heroes. Seeing Sir Night-Eye present all but confirms it. Namasa smiles, his a sweet sorrowful softness, equally as tender like a fresh cut. I'm sure we will. He acknowledges Lemillion as All Might's successor in that moment with a bittersweet acceptance. We're working together right now. Aizawa deadpans with a sense of dry humor. He sizes Toshinori up and down with his eyes, skeptical of the blonde's presence. Remembering him from Night-Eye's office, he holds his tongue for the time being. The underground hero is too tired to solve another mystery, so he sighs in surrender before relenting. I'm still not sure how you factor into all of this, but if Night-Eye and Detective Tsukauchi vouch for you, then feel free to listen in. Namasa can't decide between wanting to roll his eyes at Aizawa's antics or laughing. The detective can only imagine what the tired underground hero would come up with if he only knew about All Might in One for All. With how far-fetched Aizawa's theories usually are, it'd be amusing and entertaining for once. Aizawa glances around the circle of people that's gathered before beginning. This was the last known stronghold used by the Yakuza. There were a dying population, an endangered species if you will, and now they've been wiped out in the blink of an eye. Cross-referencing my reports, the number of stakeouts, sting operations, and all else my agency has done to catch the Yakuza with their hand in the cookie jar. Aizawa is 100% correct. Sir Night-Eye continues for the underground hero. He smooths out his combed green hair before elaborating. All bodies, despite their disfigurement, have been identified. The entire Yakuza is present and accounted for. Toshinori grits his teeth in frustration, his usual smile vanishing. When the hero gets passionate about something, he has a hard time keeping that righteous rage in check. The blonde's fists tremble at his sides as he applies pressure to clench them tight. It shouldn't have gone like this. So gruesome. Tagata surveys the crime scene with an equally troubled expression. He seems as though he's only now noticed the corpses. It's not heroic at all, is all he has to say about the way the Yakuza was mangled. Namasa sees why Toshinori chose the boy now. There's a bit of himself in his successor. They both agree that he nods his head in humble agreement with their sentiments, and his friend's decision for a successor. Night-Eye hums a mutual consensus before continuing. Well, this ends the chapter on the Yakuza. It doesn't quite close the book. His calculating gaze shifts to Namasa. As feared, this ties directly into your investigation on the Tokyo Ghoul. The detective is startled by suddenly being made the center of attention. Under the gaze of Night-Eye no less, whether that stares with his foresight quirk activated or not, it's unsettling. Namasa does his own surveillance of the crime scene before responding. Though he'd already seen it all on the way in, he really takes in the amount of destruction. This time, he thinks about it rather than just looking. How do we know this was the Ghoul? Well, the bodies are his MO, this wreckage isn't. He inquires the group to see if they managed to gather any concrete evidence yet. Of course, Aizawa is the one to speak on behalf of them when it comes to this part. This wreckage is from a rampage. Based on my theory that the Ghoul is a preteen or teenager, a temper tantrum isn't far-fetched. And it's of course all based merely on speculation. That's an assumption, Aizawa. We've been over this. Naomasa refrains from slapping his palm too hard into his face. He swears he feels wrinkles starting to come in at this point. However, Night Eye is quick to defend Eraserhead. What's not an assumption is that the Yakuza was holding a child here. Once that child went missing, this happened. He prevents his glasses from sliding any further down his nose by pushing them up. That can be a coincidence. Not you too. Naomasa winces in sympathy for Toshinori's former sidekick. He knows what it's like to be roped into Aizawa's crazy conspiracies, and to actually start believing them. Trying to remain the voice of reason, he persists, that still doesn't mean it was all the ghoul. Aizawa crosses his arms over his chest before asking with a raised brow, "Weren't you the one who originally suspected the ghoul was involved with the Yakuza?" Naomasa opens his mouth to deny the claim, but remembers asking that question when Aizawa first contacted him about the Yakuza resurfacing. "That's only because I didn't expect you to call me for any other reason," he says as an excuse more for himself than the team that's assembled. When he sees none of them are convinced, he goes for a different approach. "Look, I'm trying to be optimistic here. We don't want this to be ghoul related. It's almost like you're hoping this is the ghoul's work." "I am hopeful," Aizawa admits. All heads turn towards the underground hero, surprised by his statement. Naomasa wonders if all that sleep deprivation and caffeine finally destroyed his mind. That's until he explains himself. If it is, then we have another lead towards catching them. The ghoul has never acted on impulse this emotionally before. "I told you, there's people influencing their actions now." As much sense as that reasoning makes, Toshinori shakes his head. "I'm with Naomasa. We don't want this to be the ghoul." That remark doesn't help better Aizawa's opinion of the blonde, judging by the frown he wears. Toshinori sees the expression and returns it with his own, not backing down. He explains himself like Aizawa had to for everyone to understand. If they are just a child, then we want them to be rehabilitated. Going from robbing blood banks to this is a big leap in the wrong direction. Night Eye massages his chin as he mulls over both sides of the argument, stroking a non-existent beard of wisdom. When he can decide which one he agrees with, he shifts his focus back to Toshinori. "After all that the ghoul has done, you think they can still be rehabilitated?" It's a valid question that he directs at the symbol of peace. Except, it's that symbol's successor that answers. Anyone can be saved. His smile is a radiant ray of hope brighter than the sun. Toshinori's smile is much more reserved, but noticeable when Tagata adds, "That's the job of a hero." Aizawa taking pity on the poor boy so that he doesn't fall under Aizawa's wrath, and having had enough of the group's bickering, Naomasa decides to intervene. "We'll cross those bridges when we get there. Right now, we need to focus on actually finding the ghoul." He glances from member to member of the ragtag team. "That's why we're all meeting, right?" "Yes." Night Eye nods. "This has become a group effort. We all need to report to one another if this is to work." Aizawa faces Night Eye to tack on, "We should break into teams. We'll accomplish more that way. Since the Yakuza was yours to begin with, you can follow this rabbit hole to see if it goes anywhere." But Naomasa doesn't want to let the underground hero become team captain if he can help it. The detective pulls way too many all-nighters as it is. "And what about you?" he asks Aizawa to see if he can trip him up. Considering Eraserhead doesn't smile often, and his grin is nowhere near as bright or assuring as Tagata's or Toshinori's, the shivers that run down the detective's spine are to be expected. "Don't worry, Tsukauchi, I'm not off the hook either. As a matter of fact, you're with me," Aizawa says with a toothy smirk. "What? Why?" Naomasa grabs his head in bewilderment. He has no hat to scrunch, only hair to pull. He just might yank it all out. "We still got the mask shop to investigate. It's been long enough that you got that search warrant we talked about, right?" Aizawa reverts to his usual all-business and no-pleasure demeanor to remind the detective of their previous arrangement. Remembering that tie to the Yakuza and potential lead on the ghoul, Naomasa nods. "Yeah." Then it's settled. Aizawa concludes the meeting by starting to break away from this small huddle. Before he can walk too far away though, Toshinori catches him by the shoulder. When Aizawa looks back, "What about us?" The deflated hero gestures between himself and Tagata. Aizawa's shrug knocks the blonde's hand off his shoulder. "You tell me." He dismisses the two before resuming his walk towards the exit. When the blonde turns around to ask the others for their input, Naomasa shrugs too. "Sorry Toshinori. I always hate to admit it, but when Aizawa is right, he's right." The detective deflates just as much as the frail form of the hero, once he makes that confession. Seeing nobody else has a task for them, Night Eye offers a solution to the pair of blondes. "The best you two can do is patrol this general vicinity, and hope the ghoul keeps a small hunting ground," before waving for them to leave too. "Yeah." Toshinori sighs as he follows behind the retreating form of Aizawa. "We can only hope." Little does the hero know, the Tokyo ghoul actually is nearby. Working his regular shift at Antiku, Akatani Mikumo serves coffee to customers, while occasionally taking a sip from his own cup. Meanwhile, Iri sits at her usual table waiting for him to finish working. The little girl looks up from her coloring book to see a boy sitting at the table across from her. He has evenly split peppermint hair and a burn scar that reaches from his hairline to the bottom half of his cheek. What interests her the most about the customer, however, is what he's holding in his hands. Eri is startled by surprise when the boy looks up from the novel that he's reading. Heterochromic eyes squint when they meet the horned girls. Yes. The boy tilts his head as he tries to gauge the child that's been staring at him. Sorry. Eri squeaks out as she shrinks in on herself to the size of a mouse. Past traumatic experience has her recalling the punishment she would get from the Yakuza. She glances in the direction of Akatani, knowing that he'd protect her. Yet, she can't help but be afraid of what the scarred boy might do to her. Recognizing the small girl's body language all too well, the boy softens his glare. There's no reason to apologize, he says as an attempt to put her at ease. When Eri looks back up, having not expected that from him, he tries to follow her eyeline. He's not usually self-conscious about it, but he has a feeling he knows just why a child would take interest in his appearance, as well as be afraid of him. Were you staring at my scar? He asks. Eri's eyes widen with her mouth, a panicked realization dawning on her. And no. She exclaims to clear up the misunderstanding. Her eyes fall on the book in the boy's hands. My brother is reading me that book. Her voice wobbles a bit, but she works up enough courage to give an explanation. Realizing he jumped to conclusions, the boy's own eyes widen a bit. He too looks down at the novel he's holding. He doesn't think the little girl in front of him is the right reading age for it, but he isn't the best at estimating how old somebody is either. He's fairly certain the girl is no older than 10 though. Unfamiliar with how to interact with kids, he's a little more awkward than usual when he says, "Oh, yes. It's very good." Relief relaxing her expression, Eri perks up a little. MHM. She nods in agreement. I don't understand some of the words sometimes, but Big Bro teaches me what they mean. The boy nods too, pleased that he was right in the assumption that she wouldn't be able to read a book of that level. That's nice. He's uncertain of how to reply though. He's not used to being social, let alone with a kid. Scrambling for a way to break the awkward silence, he finds another common ground. I have older siblings too. That must have been the right thing to say, since Eri's mouth hangs open in awe. Her eyes shimmer under the sunbeams that shoot through the window. Are they as nice as Akatanai? The interest she has to hear his answer has her leaning forward in her chair. A faint trace of a smile crosses the boy's lips. He wants to laugh at the nickname the little girl gave her brother, but refrains from it as to not upset her. Yes, they are. His smile softens as he speaks with fondness, especially my sister. I have a big sis too. Eri bounces with joy in her seat. She radiates with happiness over being able to relate with the boy in so many ways. The coloring book she has just so happened to be one that Himiko herself doodled in. The blood red crayon-colored heart that the blonde drew makes Eri say, she's nice like a Akatanai, but silly. Familiar with the concept of siblings, the boy can't withhold a small chuckle this time. My sister is silly too, he says while recalling the occasions that his sister would try to cheer him up. Taking a moment to pause his work of taking orders, Akatani checks on Eri with a glance. When he sees his younger sister talking to some random guy, his instinct to protect her kicks in. Eri, are you alright? The brotherly barista is at her table in a flash. He looks her over for injuries, not finding anything, but only lessens his concern when she nods in confirmation that she isn't harmed. Akatani then remembers where he's at, and feigns being apologetic to the customer. I'm so sorry, sir. She's usually too shy to do this sort of thing. She was no trouble. The boy waves dismissively before extending that same hand. You must be Akatanai. Taken aback by the customer's usage of Eri's nickname, he stumbles over himself a bit before being able to shake hands. It's actually a Akatani. He stammers with a small blush of embarrassment. The boy's small smile returns when he sees the red dusting the barista's cheeks. I like Akatanai better. He shrugs his shoulders as he teases Akatani. Seeing Akatani's blush turn even brighter, Eri tilts her head in curiosity. Glancing between the two boys, she innocently asks a not-so-innocent question. Is this like when you and Big Sis flirt? The boy with peppermint hair raises a brow, sending Akatani into a full spiral. It's not like that. He blurts out in an attempt to avoid a miscommunication. Her Big Sis isn't actually blood-related. After trying to salvage the situation, Akatani mumbles under his breath, I shouldn't have told her what flirting is. The customer's smile stretches as he watches Akatani murmur. He finds it amusing how easily flustered the waiter gets. I'm Shoto. He interrupts the panicked jumble of words. Akatani pauses, not quite catching what was said during his muttered frenzy. He blinks. My name. Shoto explains before reintroducing himself properly. I'm Shoto Todoroki. Being a former hero fanatic and closet otaku, Akatani jumps at the recognition of the boy's family name. Todoroki like the number 2 hero Endeavor Todoroki. He shouts in a moment of euphoria over meeting the number 2 hero's son. Shoto's smile drops at the mention of Endeavor. Yes. Akatani flinches at the cold bite of the boy's tone. Can we not talk about my father though? Just now noticing the burn mark on Shoto's face, Akatani comes to his own assumed conclusions. Oh. He bows apologetically for having been insensitive. I'm sorry. Shoto feels the other boy's eyes on his scar. Placing a hand over the permanent burn, he sighs and clears up any misplaced thoughts. He wasn't the one that did this, if that's what you're thinking. Shoto can see surprise mixed with confusion cross Akatani's face before his expression becomes something more relieved. What Shoto says next wipes that relieved expression away. It was my mother's doing. She hated my quirk. Shoto turns his head, no longer looking at Akatani directly. Akatani swallows whatever condolences he could have given. He's sure Todoroki has heard all of it before, and that those words are just empty without meaning by now. Looking at Eri, Akatani instead comes up with a potential solution to the burn victim's shame. I know we just met and this might be presumptuous of me, but Eri and I get ridiculed for our quirks too. Shoto's head shoots up in surprise, and he finds himself staring at the pair of illegitimate adoptive siblings again. So we actually attend this quirk support group. Maybe you would like to come with us. Staring at the two who claim to be brother and sister, Shoto can't find any physical similarities between the two. One's hair is a pure silky white, while the other's is a charcoal black. Yet, he can still see the bond that they share. In the short span of time that he's met them, they made him smile more than he has during the past year. Unable to turn down the offer of such good people, Shoto says, I would like that. The unlikely trio of Todoroki, Mikumo, and Eri stride in a synchronous step. Their line creates an unintentional wall of tallest to shortest. Yet, none of them notice. Eri at the tail end clings to Akatani's hand like a lifeline, her tiny palm only managing to grab a few fingers in its small size. Todoroki keeps his heterochromic gaze forward while the other boy looks at him from the side. Despite Todoroki's lack of making eye contact or at least glancing in Akatani's direction, the two carry a conversation seemingly well. Both boys overcome their shy by nature attitude for the most part. It's not like they've ascended from introvert to extrovert though. There's still plenty of awkward or curt responses from Todoroki in particular, for example. A few of which gained giggles from Eri. The three youths journey down a corridor, heading for the quirk support group meeting at the end of the hall. Wow, I always dreamed of going to UA. What's it like? Akatani is only now getting over the initial stupor of learning Todoroki is attending Japan's top hero school. Todoroki shrugs as though it's no big deal, treating it just like any other school. Akatani would be inclined to disagree, and he's not the only one. Not if you're in the hero course. Shinso overhears them as they draw near the building's vending machines. The snack station has become their usual meeting place due to their mutual love for coffee. Akatani waves with his free hand, smiling despite the lazy look Shinso gives the group of three. Shinso. I was wondering if you were gonna be here today. Though Akatani was admittedly hoping that the other boy would be so that he could introduce him to Todoroki, this is. I know who he is. Shinso's eyes stop drooping so that they can squint at the hero in training who had tagged along. Todoroki returns the glare with one of his own, also noting the bitterness of Shinso's tone. The effort it takes to scowl with how heavy his eye bags are must be too much, because Shinso lets it drop first. However, not without asking first, what's somebody with a privileged quirk like his doing here? Akatani's own eyes widen in shock at how harsh Shinso is being. Come on, that's not fair. He tries to step in between the two, but Todoroki moves forward first. That's okay, Mikumo. I know when I'm not welcomed. He continues to direct his glare at Shinso despite addressing Akatani. Akatani makes sure that he gets in between them this time, letting go of Eri, so that he can wave both hands in a placating manner. I'm sure that's not what Shinso meant. He forces a fake chuckle in an attempt to de-escalate the situation. Don't speak for me. I meant what I said. Shinso snaps at Akatani next before returning his anger back to Todoroki. He was blessed with a quirk meant for heroics, and yet he wants to come here to complain. Todoroki smirks mirthlessly, a scoff making him sound arrogant to the insomniac. When he raises his left hand to waist level, a few sparks of flame flicker from it. The power display reminds Akatani of someone he knew in his former life. Todoroki incredulously repeats, a blessing. Don't act like the son of Endeavor would be born with a curse. Shinso sneers as he too looks at the side of Todoroki that's able to produce fire. Todoroki's glare flicks forward from his hand, staring at the other boy with animosity. Some of us aren't the children of pro-heroes. The outstretched hand folds into a fist when Shinso voices his mutual disdain. Before Akatani can try intervening again, he feels something small grab onto the leg of his pants. A caught an eye. He sees Eri looking up at him with a worrisome expression. Why are they yelling? Taking one of her hands in one of his again to comfort her, he says, it's okay, Eri. There's nothing to be worried about. Her gaze moves from him back to the other teenagers, unconvinced. Akatani sighs before raising his voice towards them. Come on, guys. You're scaring Eri. The two stop their bickering to glance over at him and a horned little girl, surprised by the aggressiveness in his tone. Realizing he was perhaps too hostile with how he sounded, he dials it back down with a small plea of, can't we just get along? Shinso opens his mouth as though he's about to retort, pauses, and then frowns. Shaking his head in surrender, he turns his back to the group. I'm going to grab a seat before they're all taken. He doesn't bother glancing back as he uses his excuse to walk away from them. Todoroki watches with Akatani, both boys wondering whether or not one of them should try calling out or going after him. Figuring he doesn't know Shinso well enough, Todoroki resigns himself to defeat as well. I shouldn't have come. He turns to walk in the opposite direction while apologizing to Akatani, sorry for causing a disturbance. No? Stay. But Akatani won't let another one of his friends walk out on him. He grabs Todoroki by the shoulder in order to stop him in his tracks. Todoroki is surprised by the strength in the boy's grip, but doesn't say nor show any signs of it, aside from a glance back. I don't know what got into Shinso, but... Akatani lets his hand slip from Todoroki's shoulder as he suggests, this is a place for sharing. If you're comfortable, maybe you can make him understand how you feel. Todoroki refrains from expressing his internal contemplation, only holding his stare with the other boy. It's as though he'd been frozen in place by the very implication of sharing his feelings. It's as though he'd been asked to tread on thin ice. Have you or Eri ever told anyone how you feel? He asks to see if they'd taken that confident chance yet. Akatani's mouth forms a thin line, unable to say he has. He places a hand on Eri's head, looking down at the little girl. I think if others show that it's okay to be open about it, that then she'll open up too. It's a subtle way of saying he's mostly here for her and not himself. Having siblings of his own, Todoroki can empathize to a certain extent. He sighs before giving a single nod of agreement. Fine. I'll give it a try. More relieved than surprised to hear it, Akatani perks up with a shout of, great. He's about to lead the charge straight into the meeting, before he realizes the other reason why they stopped by the snack station. Oh, let me just grab a coffee first. He digs into his pocket for his wallet to buy one from the vending machines while asking, you want anything, Eri? When the little girl shakes her head, he turns his towards the other boy, Todoroki. We just came from a coffee shop. Todoroki deadpans with the monotone demeanor that Akatani had been more used to than the exchange between he and Shinso. Oh, I guess we did. Akatani remembers that they did indeed come here from Antiku while bashfully running a hand through his hair. He then chuckles nervously while trying to cover for himself with the usual excuse he's become accustomed to giving people. My quirk actually makes me have to consume a certain amount of coffee though, so... Oh? Is the only way Todoroki knows how to respond to that. Though there's no actual genuine shock in his voice nor face. When a canned coffee rolls out upon purchase, Akatani grabs it with a disappointed downward sag of his shoulders. Ah, they've only got heated left. He was hoping to get one of the iced coffees, but they're all sold out. Todoroki holds out his right hand, prompting Akatani to hand him the can. Let me see. Akatani raises an eyebrow in confusion, but curiously passes it over. Almost instantaneously, frost flakes the metal as Todoroki cools the coffee down using his right side. Whoa! Akatani exclaims in awe at the display of power. After seeing Todoroki create fire, he wasn't expecting to see ice as well. Is it your quirk? His astonishment becomes mistaken for wonderment when he asks a question that he already knows the answer to by this point. Todoroki nods as he returns the chilled coffee to Akatani. A somber smile so small that it's easily misforms from his mouth as he explains half-heartedly, my mother's side. Akatani cocks his head to the side in confusion as he pops open the lid to his coffee. What do you mean? He asks before taking a sip. Todoroki's smile turns downwards, much more noticeable, as he says, the other half is my father's quirk. Akatani picks up on the boy's peculiar wording, swallowing his current gulp of coffee. Your father's. But before he can try to figure out what Todoroki means. We're beginning. A shout comes from the meeting room of the quirk support group. Todoroki turns in the direction of which the voice came, planning on following it to his source to avoid discussing his quirk any further. We should go. We wouldn't want to be late. He says as an excuse to drop the topic and walk away. Akatani looks down, planning on being downtrodden, but finds his illegitimate sister staring up at him instead. Not wanting to upset her more than the entire encounter just then may already have, he offers her an assuring smile as best as he can muster, before taking her hands in his in order to lead her to the support group's makeshift circle of chairs. Thank you all for coming. An orange-skinned woman the size of the chair she's in welcomes everyone with a toothless smile. She flashes her gums towards Todoroki in what's meant to be a kind gesture. I see we have a new face in the crowd. Before turning her gaze to everyone else, remember, all are welcome. Everyone is free to listen or share. None of us have the right to judge the other. Akatani catches Shinso staring at Todoroki, but the purple-haired boy quickly looks away. So no pressure, newbie. Take it at your own pace. The ringleader then finishes her opening statement. Todoroki glances at Akatani, remembering his agreement to speak. Shinso returns his gaze to the newcomer when he says, I don't mind sharing. Oh ho. Brave one. The ringleader praises Todoroki with a tiny applause of encouragement. I sure as hell couldn't share during my first time. An older man with 5 sets of eyes that each wears glasses chimes in as well. The man next to him folds his arms before grumbling, first time. Mikumo and Shinso haven't shared still. Todoroki hums as he looks over at Akutani. Both he and Shinso have their heads down, not wanting the unwarranted attention. Will you if I do? Todoroki asks anyways. The entire room goes silent in anticipation, not wanting to miss hearing the answer. Akutani doesn't have to lift his head to see Todoroki is still staring at him. Even Shinso from across the room has an expectant look. Akutani turns his head to see Eri beaming up at him, clearly agreeing with everyone that she'd like to hear him share. Maybe a little. He mumbles. That must be good enough for Todoroki. He responds, okay. Before addressing the entire room to begin his sharing, are you all aware of what quirk marriages are? Meanwhile, someone else is going to have answers unwillingly pried out of them in the interrogation room of a police precinct. Yuta, the mask maker, sits in a rickety chair waiting for someone to sit in the replica across the table in front of him. His own reflection in a one-way mirror is all the company he has for now. Eventually, Detective Namasa enters the room through a steel door. It only opens from the outside, latches locking thanks to a mechanism on the other end when it closes behind him. Sorry to keep you waiting. The detective removes his tan overcoat to hang on the backrest of his chair before sitting down. Yuta narrows his eyes at the detective's rectangular ones. I thought you didn't suspect me for anything. He recalls their first meeting and compares it with where he is now. Is there a reason for us to suspect you? Namasa sounds nonchalant, but the question is anything but casual. He's hoping his light-detecting quirk will be able to catch Yuta right away, hook, line, and sinker. Yuta tugs on the handcuffs attached to his wrist. The other end is attached to a table leg, no second arm to connect to instead. There's a reason why you arrested me. He tries to hide his annoyance, but it's evident in his tone. We took you into police custody. This isn't exactly a formal arrest. Namasa notes the difference for the record. He knows it's safe to add, although it can be. To apply an intimidating pressure for the interrogation though. Like there's a difference. Yuta mutters under his breath before asking louder for Namasa to hear, why am I here? Rather than beat around the bush any longer, Namasa places a burlap sack on the table. It's not just any old potato sack though. It has eye holes in the mouth stitching. That search warrant I came back to your store with helped us find this. Namasa gestures to the mask before prompting Yuta to elaborate, care to explain. Yuta swallows the lump forming in his throat. He recognizes what he made for Sorimitsu tape right away. Except, he also believes there's no evidence that would determine that's who it belongs to. It's a mask. I run a mask shop. Hardly anything incriminating. He tries to act unfazed by it. While Yuta's poker face is good, Namasa isn't willing to give up so easily. He leans back in his chair with a sigh, prepared for the long haul if that's what it takes to get answers. I'm only about to tell you this because it's a legal requirement per interrogation. He hopes that the revelation of his quirk will work in his favor, and not against him as he says, my quirk allows me to detect whether or not you are lying. A lie is considered an admission of guilt, so I suggest cooperating. When Yuta's eyes broaden, Namasa takes that as a sign to begin, since that can only mean he understands. Did you sell to the Yakuza? The detective starts with a simple question first. Yuta hesitates, not wanting to answer, but knowing there's no use in being uncooperative or lying. So he relents and answers truthfully, yes. Namasa nods when his quirk lets him know that Yuta wasn't lying. That was a test. He says since he already knew about the mask maker supplying the Yakuza. He returns to the particular mask sold and in his current possession, jabbing it with a finger. This next question is important. Why were you in possession of the mask here? Yuta grits his teeth, not quite baring them like fangs, but definitely being backed into a corner. He knows exactly who returned the mask to him. He wouldn't so easily give a name though. As someone brought it back to the shop. Is what he says instead as an attempt to mislead the detective. Namasa refrains from grinding his own teeth together in mutual frustration. Instead, he continues to pry Yuta's mouth open for answers by asking for more specific details, for repairs. No? Yuta shoots the question down easily since his answer is true. But that just provides Namasa with a window of opportunity to dig a little deeper. He knows Yuta has something to hide if he's trying to prolong the process this much. Who brought it to you? Was it the Yakuza? He feels like he already knows the answer, but asks regardless. Yuta avoids the first question entirely, opting for the second. No. It wasn't the Yakuza. And the answer he gives is exactly what Namasa was expecting. Considering they both already knew the Yakuza were buying from him, it wouldn't have been an admission of any kind of guilt to say they just brought one of the masks back. Which means whoever had the mask wasn't a member of the Yakuza. Considering the Shai Haseikai was massacred, Namasa suspects that the person in question must be the one responsible for it. Regardless of whether that's the Ghoul like Aizawa suspects or not, it'll be a huge break in the investigation to discover their identity. I see. Namasa nods as he comes to terms with his own deductive reasoning. Wanting to broach that possibility, he tries asking, are you aware that the Yakuza has been completely wiped out? An unreadable reaction comes from Yuta. He's unable to remain stoic anymore, mouth as wide as his eyes. Naomasa almost mistakes it for complete and total surprise, prepared to dismiss his prior theory, but then notices the shakiness of Yuta's single hand. The chain of the handcuffs rattles. I don't know what to say. Yuta truly is shaken to the core. Not because he cares about the Yakuza though, and not quite because he wasn't expecting their demise either. To Naomasa, it looks more like an expression of awe over something finally happening. Perhaps there were no expectations, but something else. A possibility. A chance. He knew that it could maybe happen. I'll take that as a yes. Naomasa keeps his eyes on Yuta as he searches for any other nonverbal responses. When he finds none, he tries to be more direct. Answer me this. Do you know who did it? Yuta's eyes begin to water. He's holding back tears, trying to shake them away with his head. I do. He hates himself for admitting that to the detective. Naomasa leans forward in his seat. He's sure that the underground hero watching the interrogation from the other side of the one-way mirror is leaning forward in anticipation too. Was it the Tokyo Ghoul? The detective's voice trembles as much as Yuta himself. Yuta's body is racked with sobs as he gives in to the tears. Please. He cries out to anyone that'll hear his begging. The detective. God, even though he's looking down at the floor from which the devil dwells. Yuta knows he'll be going there, for how can God forgive him when he can't forgive himself? Akatani on the other hand. Yuta wipes the tears from his eyes so that he can look Naomasa in his. He's just a kid. He doesn't know any better. Shinso's shoulders sag similarly to the skin under his eyes as he listens to Todoroki's tale of woe. A few winces and grimaces wash over the group in waves when they hear about the abuse. Some relate, rubbing bruises of their own. It's something none of them expected to hear. Akatani sneaks a glance at Eri, reminded of the girl's time spent with the Yakuza. The bandages she used to wear and what was underneath haunts him just as much as it must her. My father used my mother to get his masterpiece of the quirk. Todoroki summarizes the story as he creates a flame in the palm of one hand, while emitting frost from the other to demonstrate. The scarred boy no longer sounds resentful. Just sad. Even when he says, that's why I despise his side. Shinso continues staring at Todoroki. As though he's studying him. The son of Endeavor stares at his open palms with such dismay that he'd have you believe they're covered in blood. Akatani knows what that's like. To look at your hands, yourself, and see something horrendous. Todoroki's hands don't appear dirty to the group, but he clearly sees something on them that they don't. Todoroki only breaks from the inner turmoil when Shinso causes a disruption. The chair leg scraping against the floor when Shinso stands up draws everyone's attention. Just as abruptly as he stood, Shinso turns and leaves. After a moment of awkward silence, nobody knowing whether they should go to or what to say if they choose to stay, the group leader clears her throat. Redrawing everyone's attention, the orange-skinned woman offers a sympathetic smile. Thank you for sharing. That was very brave of you. The group collectively nods in agreement with her sentiment. Akatani turns to the other boy, carefully placing a hand on his shoulder to apply a tender touch. The scarred boy isn't being responsive to any of it. He's looking past them all, beyond Akatani. He's staring in the direction that Shinso went. Todoroki. Akatani gently prods. How do you feel? Hearing the other boy, Todoroki seems to slightly pull out of it. Better. He's lacking the confidence behind that answer though. His uncertainty comes through even more when he adds, I think. Seeing Akatani and the others concerned for his well-being, he offers them a tiny smile of assurance. It was nice to say it all out loud. However, his heterochromic eyes keep glancing in the direction that Shinso left from, having Akatani believe that's who Todoroki wanted to hear it most. Looking in that same direction, Akatani asks, do you want to step out of the room for a bit? Todoroki finally breaks his gaze from the exit to look at Akatani. He sees the other boy, following the outstretched arm to his shoulder. Sure. Todoroki nods to show his appreciation before standing up. I think I would. Akatani takes Yeri's hand in his while waving goodbye to the support group with the other. Thanks everyone. The small crowd reciprocates the gesture before he follows Todoroki's tracks. You ready to go, or do you want to go back later? Akatani asks Yeri as they leave so that she doesn't feel left out. The little girl shrugs, indifferent to the decision. When the trio go through the exit and enter the hall, all three are surprised to a sudden stop. None of them expected to find none other than Shinso waiting for them there. The purple-headed boy has his hands in his pockets before taking them out to place at his sides in order to bow. I'm sorry. He apologizes while facing Todoroki in particular. I was narrow-minded. I thought being born with a quirk not useful for heroics was the only reason someone could be burdened. Raising his back, but not his head, he continues, I didn't realize that there was more to it than that. The glazed look Todoroki had moistens. For a fleeting moment, he just might have cried. It's okay. He gestures for Shinso to raise his head. I forgive you. Akatani refrains from breathing a sigh of relief beside him. Shinso doesn't lift his head just yet though. He's not done apologizing. I know it's no excuse, but it's just that. His dampened eyes tightly clamp shut in frustration. I applied for UA too. That shocks both Todoroki and Akatani. Neither of them expected to hear any of this. Finally lifting his head, Shinso opens his eyes again. I took the entrance exam and failed because my quirk wasn't suited for the test. His voice is distantly reflective as he explains, I'm in Gen Ed now, but I so badly wanted to be a hero. Shinso. Akatani can't help but empathize despite not having taken a hero school's entrance exam himself. He at least knows what it's like to have the dream of becoming a hero ripped away due to the quirk you're born with. It's a sensitive subject. So he tries to be as gentle as he can when prompting Shinso to share some more. What is your quirk, if you don't mind me asking? The insomniac averts his gaze, fixing it to the floor. The silent response from Shinso almost makes Akatani backpedal. However, the quiet pause doesn't go on for long enough to reach that point. Rather, Shinso pushes past his hesitance enough to ask in a tired tone, are you sure you want to know? Akatani is a tad reluctant himself, not wanting to pressure Shinso into feeling like he has to answer. Taking a glance towards Todoroki and Eri to see what they think, they're each as equally ambivalent. Shinso waits patiently, expecting a response. Akatani opens his mouth to answer, but finds himself stopping short. Not of his own accord though. It's more like someone else seized control of his voice, silencing him. Akatani finds it hard to speak. He finds it difficult to convey his thoughts. It's like he no longer has any say over himself. Shinso then shows him who does have a say. Nod your head if you're under my control. Akatani feels his head bobbing up and down, despite the order not coming from his own mind. Then, after doing as he was commanded, he's freed. Akatani feels in control of his own motor functions again, testing them by opening and closing his mouth or flexing his fingers. My quirk is called brainwashing. Shinso explains what exactly just happened to him. Eri and Todoroki stare at Akatani in wonderment as he comprehends the ability that just allowed Shinso to possess him. Whoa. Akatani feels like a puppet that's just had its string cut as he rolls his shoulders. Your quirk is villainous. Shinso cuts him off, I know. Akatani fervently shakes his head in denial, not at all. Catching Shinso by surprise. It's amazing. But that makes the boy with bedhead do a double take. It's super suited for hero work, especially if you were to go underground so nobody could see it coming. Todoroki is a stark contrast of passive standing next to Akatani's exuberance. Yet, he agrees with the other boy's sentiment nonetheless. It's plenty powerful enough. If you were to brainwash me before I could encase you in ice, then my quirk would be rendered useless by comparison. He says while Akatani nods along. It's super cool, Shinso. Akatani reassures the brainwasher before turning to the girl holding his hand, right, Eri? Eri shyly mimics Akatani's earlier nod before joining in with her own praise. Why, you could have told the bad men to stop hurting me. However, she unknowingly alters the mood with her input. Both Todoroki and Shinso shift their posture while looking at Akatani for answers. Bad man. Shinso hardens his gaze. Todoroki does the same, stepping closer to Eri. Ah. That's, Akatani stammers as he scrambles for an explanation. He wasn't expecting to be put on the spot, and it's not like he can exactly tell the truth that he massacred the Yakuza to free her. It's a long story. He forces himself to laugh in a poor attempt to lighten the mood. When there's no change in the other boy's aura, he scratches the back of his head to try and jumpstart his brain for an excuse. Fortunately for him, Eri comes to his rescue. The Katanai saved me though, so it's okay now. She says while gazing up at the boy who's serving as her older brother. It's evident in her expression that she's shifted her admiration from Shinso back to him. Shinso and Todoroki visibly relax, knowing he had nothing to do with the so-called bad men. Akatani does as well, relieved that they're relieved. He gives Eri's hand a soft squeeze and a small smile. Shinso runs a hand through his unruly head of purple hair, if you two weren't already mysterious enough. Exasperated by the entire exchange. While Shinso finds them to be exhausting, Todoroki finds himself being further intrigued by the sibling-like duo. That reminds me. He shifts his gaze to Akatani in hopes of seeing something more. Mikumo. You promised to share if I did. Having completely forgotten his promise, all Akatani can manage at first is a fragile, oh. Feeling his grip slacken, Eri's gaze up at him becomes one laced with concern. Shinso also notes the way his demeanor shifted. I guess you're right. I did say that, didn't I? His voice being so timidly quiet, makes Todoroki tilt his head in confusion. Shinso steps forward. You don't have to if you aren't comfortable. Hoping to help. But Akatani shakes his head to let him know that he's okay. No. You two confided in me. It's only fair that I tell you my quirk too. His confidence is low as he avoids making eye contact, but Shinso. When he turns his gaze back up, his eyes look more fatigued than the insomniac's. If anyone's quirk here is villainous. The hand that's not holding Eri's grabs the fabric of the shirt that's covering his heart. It's mine. Eri isn't the type to make an outburst, so nobody expects her to interject with an emotional shout. That's not true. She tugs on Akatani's arm as if that'll shake some sense into him. You saved me, and you said heroes save people, so you can't be a villain. Akatani manages a fond but sad smile as he picks up Eri. She clings to him even tighter now that she can hug his body. There's a reason that I didn't try for you, though. He says to the floor now that he's staring down at the empty space where Yuri once was. When he says the rest, it's said facing towards Todoroki. My quirk is powerful too. Except, it's too powerful. He holds Yuri a little closer as he recalls what it can do. I can hurt people with it. He rephrases that when he remembers how he managed to keep her. I have hurt people with it. Shinso shifts uncomfortably as he says, why, you still haven't told us what it is yet. Akatani sighs when he finds no words to explain it any more than he already has. He figures it'll be easier if he just shows them. So he closes his eyes, covers them with the hand that's not carrying Yuri, and lets the ghoul peer through the cage of his mind's eye. When he slides his hand back, it pulls the hair hanging over his one eye to expose both. Each eye now affected by his quirk, he opens them. The red dot at the center of the cracked web is not to be mistaken for something stuck. It's what weaves. It's the arachnid's bite. Look into my eyes and tell me they look like a hero's. The unblinking void stares into the souls of Shinso and Todoroki. Let red tendrils sprout from the small of the ghoul's back, its predatory organ dancing in a hypnotizing display. Suddenly, Akatani appears much bigger than his actual size. My quirk makes me a killing machine. His growl is as intimidating as his presence at that moment. For a second, a murderous bloodlust oozes through. Feeling Yuri tremble in his arms, Akatani comes to his senses rather than the ghoul's. He snaps out of his self-imposed trance, seeing the petrified one he's put his friends and the little girl in. Immediately, the tentacles retract. He closes his eyes, shutting them as tight as he can, making them go back to normal. And he whimpers a light to make them feel better that he wishes he could believe as well. I could be one. When Akatani reopens his eyes, he sees how pale Shinso looks. Shit, Mikumo. I didn't think you could be so scary. Whatever breath he'd been holding also releases a slur of uttered words that he only realizes can be taken as offensive after they've already been said. No offense. Yuri puffs up her cheeks in more than a pout, as she tries to defend her brother. It's meant to scare the bad guys. Akatani rubs soothing circles into her back as he tries to calm her down. It's okay. I know it's unsightly. He then returns his attention towards Shinso. The other boy is about to say something, but Akatani cuts him off with an attempt to change the subject. Please don't curse in front of Yuri though. Shinso shuts his mouth and nods instead. However, Todoroki isn't ready to drop the subject matter of Akatani's quirk just yet. I thought you said your quirk forces you to drink coffee. He doesn't have an accusatory tone, but he does have a skeptical stare. Shinso's face scrunches up in a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Coffee? I did say that too, didn't I? Akatani chuckles nervously. Unbeknownst to them, that's the part of his quirk that he's most wary of sharing. For obvious reasons. So he settles for a half-truth as his explanation. For some reason, my quirk makes my taste buds different. I can't really eat food. A coffee is fine. Shinso's deadpan doesn't match his raised brow. Why yeah. Akatani swallows whatever lie he could come up with as an excuse, since he can't think of anything that'd cover up the fact that it tastes close enough to blood. For some reason. He trails off again in hopes that they'll just drop it. Shinso seems to be accepting of the answer, relatable. Giving a non-committable shrug. Todoroki on the other hand, not really. It's a bit strange. How can you be so blunt? Shinso shouts incredulously over the other boy's stoic mannerism, losing his own. The mood changed significantly. Akatani allows himself to laugh at their antics. Well, regardless. I'll admit that it felt good to get off my chest. He feels Yuri cradled against it and returns her warm hug with one of his own. You all didn't judge me as harshly as I was expecting. Todoroki hums in mutual understanding from having shared his personal story, while Shinso turns away from them to hide his embarrassment over having similar feelings. Whatever. The insomniac tries to play it off like no big deal with a wave over his shoulder. I've gotta get going now anyways. He walks slowly but surely towards the exit. See you around. Bye Shinso. Akatani says on behalf of the trio that's made up of himself, Yuri, and Todoroki. He then realizes the little girl in his arms is starting to get tired. Yuri, and I should probably head home too anyways. Unable to shake hands or bow with his sister occupying his arms, he flashes a smile instead. Thanks for coming, Todoroki. I know we just met, but I feel like we're already close friends. Of all things that could have taken Todoroki by surprise that day, it's hearing that which makes his heterochromic eyes whiting. Friends. He tests the word on his tongue with a hesitance like it's foreign. After a moment of contemplating what that means, he asks, does that mean we should do this again? Akatani laughs again, if you want. Mistaking the question as a request to continue attending support meetings. I'll bring Yuri here again for sure, but you can also always come by Antiku during my shift. But he just so happens to be the embodiment of friendliness, fortunately for Todoroki. Taking that as an invitation, Todoroki nods. Okay. He hesitates before testing the unfamiliar word again, friend. Yeah. See you later Todoroki. Akatani picks up on the unusual usage of the word that time. Rather than make it any weirder or awkward though, he teases Todoroki by tagging on at the end, fellow friend. Todoroki smiles as he watches the receding form of Akatani carrying Eri. The girl in the boy's arms with white hair reminds him of his siblings, making him pull out his cell phone to call his own sister. He waits for a few rings, hoping that she'll answer. Ironically, now that summer has ended, it's gotten warmer out. The sun shines down on Akatani and Eri as they stroll along the sidewalk. Birds sing melodies of hope, and the wind blows so gently that not a leaf falls. For once, the two find peace and tranquility. Akatani is accustomed to this calm before the storm, but this time, he feels like it's truly as good as it's going to get. Akatanai. Eri's muffled mumble comes from where she has her face snuzzled into the boy's chest. If not for his quirk heightening his hearing and other senses, Akatani would have not heard her. He looks at the tiny girl in his arms, reining in a laugh at how she looks like a baby ostrich burying its head in the sand. Switching her from one arm to the other, so that the one he's been holding her with can get a break, he responds, "Yes, Eri. Am I?" Her soft voice starts to ask something, but it trails off before she can finish. After a short pause, her face comes out of hiding to speak more clearly. "Is my quirk villainous?" She's still as quiet as a mouse, but Akatani hears her anyways. Eri's question makes the boy stop in his tracks, his heart throbbing for her. "Oh, Eri." He pulls her back into a hug in an attempt to comfort her. "I don't know what your quirk is, but I can guarantee you that it's anything other than villainous." Hoping to cheer her up, he boops her on the tiny horn that sprouts from her forehead. "It gave you this cute horn after all." Eri giggles at the affection, her spirit successfully brightened. "You're like a tiny unicorn." He laughs along. Eri's smile slackens when she gets a good look at the boy holding her though. She takes in his appearance, noting the effects of his quirk aren't present. "But what about you?" she innocently asks. "You have tails and eyes, but you say those are bad." Akatani's smile softens as well, no words able to come out of it to help her understand why they're so different. "It's a little more complicated than that," he says instead. After ruffling her silky white hair, he proceeds to carry her down the sidewalk again. "Don't worry about it." His emerald eye glimmers when it meets Eri's red ones. "Like you said, my quirk keeps you safe, so it can't be all that bad." Eri nods in agreement before resting her head against the chest that she's been using as a pillow. "You're my hero, Akatanai." If he weren't worried about dropping her, Akatani would break down in hysterics. He can feel the tears tugging at the corners of his eyes like the strings connected to his heart. Maybe in another life, he would have allowed himself to collapse under the emotional wave. Rather than falling to his knees and crying though, he keeps his legs moving, and his gaze on the girl who called him a hero. "Thanks, Eri." His voice is damp even after he swallows some saliva in an attempt to dry it. "I'm glad that I could be someone's." With her face buried, she can't see how seriously her earlier words affected him. So she gives no preamble to what she says next. "Can I have a candy apple?" Her childish question catches the boy completely off guard. Unable to contain his laughter over how sudden and random, but so eerie-like that request is, he has to hold her closer not to drop her while shaking from a giggle fit. "Were you just trying to get on my good side for a candy apple?" he teases. "No." Eri's stomach guiltily grumbles as she tries to deny his claim. Laughing still, but taking her hunger seriously, Akatani turns at the next corner. "Alright. We can swing by the shop for one." He's sure the girl is just as grateful as he is that Antiku isn't far from where they are now. Feeling her stir, rekindling energy that wasn't there before, he can sense her anticipation of the sugary sweet. Just one though. He has to remind her not to splurge. It's one of those occasions where he really does feel the responsibility of an older brother. He's become accustomed to bringing Eri along with him to Antiku. The store owner, Yoshimura, has too. He's welcomed the girl with open arms, offering pastries on the house at times. In a sense, he's like her surrogate uncle or grandfather. Akatani's smile slips and falls from his face when he sees who's waiting for him there instead though. A tall and slender man in an unkempt state stands outside the coffee shop, hands in the pockets of a baggy black outfit. The attire is strange enough, equipped with a utility belt and some kind of specialized scarf, that he could pose a problem. Just who I wanted to see. And that greeting does nothing to allay Akatani's concerns. The scruffy man turns to face them, but doesn't move just yet. "Ah, I'm sorry sir. We're closed." Akatani tries to handle the situation diplomatically first. However, he also sets Eri down, just in case he needs his hands free. He makes sure to do so in a way that won't risk her being put in danger, placing her protectively behind him. The man notices the way the boy is guarding the younger girl before sighing in exasperation. He acts as though he can't be bothered to deal with the judgment. Yet, he does anyways. Reaching into one of the pouches on his utility belt, he flashes his hero license for the boy to see he's not a threat. You can't make an exception for an underground hero. As much as Akatani is wowed by the reveal of the man's identity, he's admittedly just as scared. "Why, you're Eraserhead." He recognizes the underground hero now that he's able to make the connection. Eraserhead's quirk is one that can render Akatani's own useless, no matter how powerful it is. He's one of the few heroes other than All Might that Akatani is fairly certain would be able to catch him. You know me. Eraserhead furrows his brows over a mere teenager recognizing him. Underground heroes purposely avoid attracting attention, so it's a wonder of its own how the boy knows him. Akatani swallows hard, not knowing how to respond at first. He eventually settles on, yeah. I used to be a big hero nerd. Used to be. Eraserhead snorts in mild amusement before shaking his head in lingering disbelief. Just don't expect an autograph, kid. Akatani jumps a little, being skittish and hearing such a suggestion too much for him to handle. Oh, that's okay. I don't need one. He forces out a pitiful laugh while trying to wave away the very implication that he'd want a signature. Remembering the original reason why he ran into the underground hero in the first place, he moves to unlock the door to Antiku. Oh, yeah. You wanted to come in. He nervously glances over his shoulder while sliding the key in. Just for a bit. Eraserhead nods in affirmation. When Akatani holds the door open for him, he steps through the entrance and then slinks over to a booth. Thank you. Closing the door behind him and relocking it to avoid getting any other unexpected customers, Akatani asks, did you want anything in particular? Getting comfortable in the vinyl of the booth, Eraserhead rests his eyes for a moment by closing them. Just a coffee to go, please. Black. He then absent-mindedly places his order. That makes sense. Akatani nods as he turns on the coffee machine. While that begins brewing, he opens the display case to get a caramel apple. An underground hero like yourself probably operates mostly at night. The little girl holds her hands out to take the candy apple, once he places it on a plate. Here, Eri. You can go sit and I'll join you soon. He hands the dish to her with one hand, while gently pushing her towards Eraserhead with the other. Eraserhead reopens his eyes to see Eri warily looking back at him. After some further coaxing from Akatani, she musters the courage to sit across from him. Is this your sister? The underground hero asks. Oh, yeah. That's Eri. Akatani realizes that he hasn't quite introduced her himself yet. Before he can give his own name though, the brewer beeps to let him know it's ready. He returns to preparing Eraserhead's coffee without saying more. Having a private moment with the little girl, Eraserhead takes it upon himself to try and not seem so intimidating. Hello, Eri. He hunches a little and awkwardly waves while introducing himself. I'm Shota Aizawa. You can call me whichever you'd like. Considering his face is covered in stubble and his shoulder-linked hair hangs over the rest, the underground hero doesn't entirely succeed at making himself less imposing. Yet, Eri strangely isn't as afraid as she normally would have been. Perhaps she's coming out of her comfort zone ever since meeting Shinso, Todoroki, and Toga. Or maybe she's just seen scarier that same day when Akatani used his quirk. Hello Aizawa. Eri doesn't quite get the pronunciation right with a mouthful of candy apple, but she tries returning the greeting with a polite one of her own. Aizawa blows air through his nose, the closest to a laugh as he'll allow. He then returns his attention to the off-duty barista that he's roped into working unpaid overtime. You two don't look related. Akatani almost spills the coffee that he's stirring, not having put a lid on the styrofoam to-go cup just yet. Oh. Well. He searches for an excuse, but is forced to surrender when he comes up empty. That's because we're not. Once the lid pops on, he carries the coffee over in order to join them in the booth. She's my adoptive sister. He says despite not having the proper paperwork. I see. Aizawa takes the coffee from Akatani but doesn't drink from it. Instead, he places the cup aside. Kid. He sighs as he prepares to say something else. Akatani tenses, anticipating nothing good. A moment passes where neither of them speak. Noticing the change in the boy's demeanor, Aizawa grabs the coffee, I never got your name, and takes a sip from it to calm the atmosphere. Oh? Akatani shoots straight to sit upright upon remembering a second time that he hasn't introduced himself. It's Akatani Mikumo. He recovers afterward and tries to find an excuse while apologizing. Sorry for not saying so sooner. I was just a bit starstruck, I guess. Aizawa hums, having a mouthful of coffee, before swallowing it down. Are you sure you weren't just surprised to see me? He asks. Akatani chuckles while nodding in agreement. Yeah. That too. Aizawa doesn't share in the boy's amusement though. He's transfixed on the coffee cup in his hand, not quite meeting Akatani's gaze. Contemplatively tapping his pointer finger on the styrofoam, he still hasn't said what it is he actually wants to say. I'm going to be honest with you, Mikumo. His tone turns serious when he finally does meet the boy's eye. I didn't come here for the coffee. Akatani fights back the reflex to flinch, trying not to show any signs of his internal panic. He's not as good at keeping the worry out of his voice though. What did you come here for? The habit of stumbling over his words rearing its ugly head. Aizawa keeps his gaze forward as he says, look out the window to your right. Making Akatani curious as to what it is he's supposed to see if he does. There seems to be nothing out of the ordinary when the boy turns his head to take a peek. Not until Aizawa gives him more specific instructions, between the fire hydrant and the stop sign. Akatani sees through the tinted windshield of a parked car, a man in an overcoat and another with a head of fur behind the dashboard staring back. Who are they? He tears his gaze away from the window and returns it to the underground hero. Aizawa's answer sends shivers down Akatani's spine. One's an undercover officer, and the other is a detective. The ceiling fan is off and none of the windows are open. The chill comes from a cold sweat. Why are they watching us? He hopes to sound oblivious, but he already knows the answer. Having finished her candy apple, Eri started listening in on the conversation. She too wears an expression of worry when Akatani asks, "Why are you telling me this?" Aizawa sighs, not fooled by the act of ignorance. Shifting from a comfortable slouch, the underground fixes his posture to be one of preparation. "I don't want you to do something stupid like trying to run away." Akatani allows himself to flinch that time. He had been planning on trying to escape as soon as he realized they found him. However, Aizawa has a fair point why that'd be a bad idea when he explains the reason why he pointed out the police. "You're surrounded, Mikumo." Getting scared by the tension separated only by a table between them and the hero, Eri leans into her guardian for protection. "Use your quirk, Akatanai." She whispers into the shirt that she clings to. Her fistfuls of fabric make the boy acutely aware of the position she's placed in by being so close to him. Hearing Eri's desperate plea and seeing their sibling-like display of affection, Aizawa is quick to act. Before Akatani's can, the underground hero's eyes flare red. The harsh glow radiates the room, casting a shadow of the man's hair raising over his head. "Don't use your quirk," Eraserhead warns. Akatani swallows, knowing he doesn't have much of a choice. The underground hero's erasure has the boy feeling powerless. It's a feeling he barely remembers from his previous life. Why are you doing this? He helplessly hopes he can persuade the man to let them go now that he can no longer fight his way out. "Why did you do what you did?" Aizawa counters. His glowing glare hardens, unwavering, as he corrects himself. "Why do you do what you still do?" The question sends another shudder through Akatani. Realizing he hasn't been accused of a specific crime yet, he asks, "What is it that you think I did?" Not diverting his attention from Akatani the entire time, Aizawa reaches into the back pouch of his belt. While the underground hero's sight stays the same, the boy looks down at the table when a familiar mask is placed there. "It's what I know you did, Mikumo." The burlap sack that once belonged to Sora Mitsutabe of the Yakuza mocks Akatani with a stitched smile. Akatani places a palm against his face, covering his previously exposed eye. In the darkness, he sees the spacious void of his mind. As vast as it is, it's filled with panic. "You're the Tokyo Ghoul." Aizawa calls that headspace what it is. It's only when he asks, "Aren't you?" that Akatani pulls himself out from it. Akatani lowers his hand, emerald eye looking into the red of Aizawa's. "Why didn't you or some other hero take me in by surprise instead of doing whatever this is?" He wonders which would have been a crueler punishment. He wonders which of the two he deserves more. Akatani startles when Aizawa's hair suddenly falls. Eraser had just deactivated his quirk. The red glow has vanished, replaced by something more sympathetic. "I wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt," he says with sincerity. The underground hero pulls out a tiny bottle of eye drops before applying them. "Can you confirm something for me, Mikumo?" And doesn't wait for Akatani to answer before continuing. "You have no other choice but to eat human flesh. Am I correct?" Akatani blinks back his surprise as he asks, "How did you know?" "I've been tracking you for a while now." Aizawa pockets his eye drops before jumping into the explanation. "When you first started, it was only once every few weeks. Then you tried blood from a blood bank. If you could get by with just that, then you wouldn't have reverted to your old ways." Realizing the underground hero is referring to the Shy Hasekai, Akatani leans back into the vinyl of his side of the booth with a sigh. "I only went after the Yakuza because of what they were doing to Eri." He grumbles his defensive reason loud enough for Eraserhead to hear. Aizawa raises a brow. "You have no remorse for what you did to them?" "None." Both of the man's eyebrows furrow when he hears the boy's answer. Aizawa mimics Akatani's earlier movement, sinking into his side of the booth with a sigh. "You're quite the problem child." He glances out the window towards his backup before returning his stare to the boy. Noticing the glance, Akatani asks, "What are you going to do to me?" He shoots a ghoulish glare as he guesses, "Put me in a cage." Hearing that her brother could possibly be locked up like she was, Eri springs out of his arms to shout across the table. "No. Don't do it, Aizawa." Her pleas startle Akatani more than Aizawa though. The underground hero keeps his composure as he gauges the pair. After a moment of silence where each side considers what the other may be thinking, he shifts to speak. "Relax. I'm not going to do that," he first assures the little girl. Then returns his attention to the boy. "You're not an animal to be locked up. You're just a kid." Akatani's eyes widen in shock, not expecting to be let off the hook so easily. His guilty conscience disagrees with the hero's verdict. "Tell that to the people I've killed. Tell that to who I've eaten." And he's fairly certain that he's not the only one who would be opposed to that judgment. Aizawa's sympathetic stare comes with more questions. "Did you want to kill them, Mikumo?" Would you have done so and devoured them if not for your quirk? Akatani thinks he doesn't deserve such sympathy, already knowing the answer to that first question. He's quiet as he considers lying, but decides to tell the truth. I wanted to kill the Yakuza. I wanted to kill the criminals and the villains. He admits his bloodlust with a heavy heart. I know that even if my quirk is meant to kill, it doesn't have to be used that way. I just chose to use it that way. Aizawa's brows raise, not expecting that from the boy. They lower as he reevaluates the situation, trying to come to the right conclusion based on the confession, but only because you needed them for consumption. No? Akatani shakes his head. I did it because I liked it. Aizawa glances out the window again, reminding himself and the boy of the not as equally considerate law enforcement, waiting to take him in. Damn it, kid. I'm trying to help you. The underground hero hisses in a hushed tone. But Akatani just shakes his head again, a somber smile on his face. Sorry, Eraserhead. There's no helping me. He looks at his hands knowing there's already been plenty of blood spilled on them. I do get these animalistic urges. A desire. They clench into fists as his frustration with himself leaks out. In the beginning, I tried not to give in. After a while though, I got used to seeing the blood. I liked it. He knows he has an instinct that he can't resist sometimes. Part of me enjoys it. Aizawa looks at the coffee cup in his hand, feeling the warmth it radiates. He imagines no longer being able to taste that kind of satisfaction. He would have to find a new enjoyment. That's what the boy had done with what he was given. If I could erase your quirk so that you could eat a regular meal again, would you still be saying that? So he tries giving the boy something else to use as an alternative. Akatani's mouth hangs open in awe, nothing coming out of it while he's at a loss for words. When he finally finds them, he's still in a state of shock. You can do that? He wonders. Aizawa nods, fairly certain that he can. Akatani looks at Eri and the empty plate in front of her. To taste something sweet again. To enjoy an apple as much as she does. Do you mind? He has to ask if he really deserves that opportunity. He thinks of all the meals he would like to eat again and wonders if he actually can. I would like to make katsudon, but... Aizawa waves away those concerns with a small stroke of his hand. Take all the time that you need. Nobody will make a move unless I give them a signal. Alleviating the boy's worries by a significant margin. Akatani feels the hero's eyes on him when he begins preparing the food. He knows the man's quirk isn't active yet, but his mouth is already watering at the mere prospect of eating a normal meal again. When he seasons pork chops with salt and pepper, he's not that revolted by the smell of meat that isn't human flesh. When he beats an egg and coats the meat with a light dust of flour, he's looking forward to the taste, and not worried about spitting it back out. He dips the pork in the egg and covers it with breadcrumbs. The yellow drizzle reminds him of blood spilling, his taste tingling. Akatani closes his eyes, trying to forget that last part. When the katsudon is finally finished, he sets the table with a plate for everyone. I made extra. It didn't feel right making something to eat by himself. Eri takes her utensils and digs in without complaint at least. Aizawa just sticks to drinking his coffee. Sitting down to join them, Akatani isn't as hasty to take a bite. It's been so long. The last time he tried to eat something other than human flesh, he puked before becoming bedridden for days. He cautiously takes a fork and knife in each hand, as though they might stab him for trying to use utensils, instead of grabbing handfuls of the meat like the animal he's become. When Akatani glances up at Aizawa, the underground hero nods. Eraserhead's quirk takes effect. The boy cuts himself a piece before sticking it with his fork. The bit of breaded pork chop is small, but he's still wary about putting it in his mouth. When he finally does, his emerald eyes begin to water as much as his tastabits. He's suddenly the crybaby kid under 4 again. Izuku Midoriya, for that short moment, gets to eat katsudon again. Kid? Aizawa's voice is full of concern when he sees the boy breaking like a dam. Are you okay? Akata and I. Yuri stops eating her own food to wrap him in a hug once she sees he's crying. Not wanting to worry either of them, he wipes his eyes with his sleeves. I'm sorry. He apologizes through sobs with a wobbly voice. I just forgot how good it was. Problem child. Aizawa says with a relieved smile. He leans back with a sigh before asking, would you like to eat more? Yes. Akatani shouts a little too eagerly. Realizing he was too loud with his hasty response, he settles back into his seat with a more reserved response. I mean, yes, please. He doesn't try hiding his bashful blush as he starts scooping more into his mouth. Just take it slow with small bites. Aizawa advises as he watches the boy eat like he's never had a meal in his life. In a sense, that may as well be the case, he figures. MMMHMM. Akatani makes a noise in response as he shoves more katsudon into his mouth. At this moment, the boy looks nothing like a ghoul. He looks just like a kid his age. Aizawa lets the teen enjoy his food for a while longer. He waits before ruining it by continuing their prior conversation. We can continue doing this. I wouldn't mind. We can see if it'll satisfy your hunger and keep doing it so long as it works. Reminded of the offer, but also how he got to this point, Akatani pauses before taking his next bite. Thank you, but... He stares down at the food that had been otherwise foreign to him. I'm offering you an alternative that only I can give. The detective I pointed out won't be so lenient if you decline my offer. Aizawa interrupts before the boy can talk himself out of the proposal. Akatani drops his fork, looking up at the underground hero. So, an ultimatum. Stop hunting criminals for food and you let me be free. He's once again taken back by the amount of mercy he's being given. Stop being the ghoul and you can live a somewhat normal life again. Aizawa nods. However, he knows deep down that even he won't be able to convince Namasa to let it end there. He doesn't want to mislead the boy and lose his trust, so he ventures a little in the territory of what other punishments lay in wait. Of course, it won't be so straightforward. You'll have to atone for what you've done somehow, and I'll need to meet with your parents. My parents are gone. Akatani abruptly interrupts. He avoids making eye contact when the underground hero frowns. The fine gone. Eraserhead deactivates his quirk as he sits up straight. The boy hesitates before saying, Akatani Mikumo isn't my real name. He doesn't lift his head just yet, still trying not to meet anyone's eyes, including Iris, who tilts her head in confusion upon hearing his confession. Aizawa, on the other hand, isn't surprised. I'm aware. Aside from your job here and the apartment that you're renting, Akatani Mikumo doesn't exist. He keeps his gaze on the boy despite his quirk no longer being in effect. He watches for a reaction that doesn't come. Akatani isn't that shocked that Eraserhead figured out his name is just an alias. After all, part of an underground hero's job is gathering information. If I tell you stuff, will you agree not to look into my past anymore? He asks instead of what else the man knows about him. Aizawa shakes his head before grabbing his coffee cup. I can't promise that. Sorry, kid. And taking a sip. At least you're being honest. Akatani mumbles before finally lifting his head to meet Aizawa's gaze. He opens his mouth, closes it, reopens it, and then closes it again. Unable to look the hero in the eyes, he looks at the katsudin in front of him instead. I first discovered my quirk when The katsudin makes him sick when it reminds him of that night long ago. I ate my mom. Christ. Aizawa nearly burns his tongue. He sets the coffee cup down as he takes that information in. He's almost too hesitant to ask, and your father? Akatani shrugs, unable to give a verbal response. Aizawa knows better than to pry any more than that, so he just sighs instead. While turning sensitive subjects, he may as well broach the next one. I can't let you raise Iri alone when you're still a child yourself. He figures it's a good segue from the topic of parents at least. You're going to take her away from me? Akatani's head shoots up in disbelief. No. Don't make me leave Akatanai. Don't. Iri takes it worse. She clings to him like he's her lifeline, inseparable if anyone were to try and take her. Aizawa feels his heart throb. He suddenly wishes he hadn't said anything. Then again, he knows it wouldn't have been any better to leave that part to Namasa. I'm sorry. There's nothing that can be done. Is all he can manage to offer is condolence. There must be. Please, you don't understand. Akatani shakes his head in denial as he returns the little girl's hug. His hold can't be too tight since it'll hurt her, but he desperately pulls her close. He treats her like a fragile treasure that's being threatened. You're asking me to make a lot of exceptions, some of which I may be able to manage, but this most certainly isn't one of them. Aizawa hangs his head in a small bow, meant to be taken as an apology for causing them so much hurt. I can only do so much. No. 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 Iri cries. Akatani runs a hand through her hair in a futile attempt to calm her. As he does so, he wonders if that'll be the last time he'll ever be able to touch her. I really don't have a choice, do I? He's starting to accept the reality of the situation. No? Sorry, kid. Aizawa tries to sound as soothing as possible while explaining, it's either this or you get taken too, which would mean not seeing her anymore anyways. Akatani nods, understanding that logic. He then looks back down at the girl wrapped in his arms. He takes a good look at her just in case it's his last. Will I at least be able to visit her? He hopes that it isn't. Maybe. Aizawa doesn't sugarcoat his uncertainty. I can try to arrange that. But he does offer them an ounce of hope if that'll help to ease their pain. Akatani blinks back the tears that threaten to spill before asking, Who will she be going to live with? She'd most likely be taken by an orphanage or some similar form of foster care. Aizawa answers. Not content with that turnout, the boy lifts his head up to look Aizawa in the eye. Can I ask you one last thing? Aizawa sees how tired the boy is from the way his skin sinks under his eyes, the weary stare in them glazed over. Sure, kid. He returns the gaze with a similar one before asking, what is it? Akatani swallows, trying to think of the right words to say. I can tell you're a good guy. He knows from the sincerity that shines when the hero's eyes aren't glowing red. So, can you take Iri as her guardian? He sees the hero react with much anticipated shock, hurrying to justify his request with, I would feel better knowing she's with someone that I can trust. Kid. Aizawa trails off as he tries to think of how he can persuade the boy into, please, Eraserhead. Please. But the boy's green puppy eyes win in the end. No argument would be enough to tell the kid no. Geez, you really are problematic. How logical. Aizawa slaps a palm against his forehead where he knows a migraine is bound to form. Fine. I'll do my best. And he starts massaging it to ease the tension before it can become overbearing. Thank you. Akutani smiles in relief. His smile quickly dissipates when he realizes he has to do something harder now. He has to convince the girl he's made his sister. He has to say goodbye, Eri. Eri shakes her head, already knowing he's about to try. No. I don't want to go. Her grip tightens and she presses into him harder as a form of protest. I know, Eri, I know. He holds her a little more loosely. I don't want you to go either. He knows he can't hold her any tighter for the same reason she has to go. He's too dangerous. But remember how I told you my quirk is villainous? Eri pulls her head back just enough to shout at Akutani without losing her grip, but you saved me with it, you said. And then turns to yell at Aizawa, you're the villain. Not Akatanai. Akutani pulls her back, trying to calm her down. Eri, it's not his fault. He shoots Aizawa an apologetic look before looking into Eri's eyes. He's a real hero. He'll be able to take care of you better than I can. But Eri is still in denial, bottom lip quivering. Who's going to keep me safe if you're not there? The tears ebbing at the corners of her eyes start to run down her cheeks. Wanting to stay strong for her, Akutani fights to hold his back. Don't worry. The bad man won't bother you ever again. I made sure of it. He tries to sound confident in order to be assuring, and I'll always be around. I'll come see you from time to time. But I want to stay with the Akatanai. She presses her face into his chest, tears wetting his shirt. Don't cry. He whimpers while trying not to cry too. This isn't goodbye. I promise I'll see you again. He closes his eyes to prevent them from spilling. But he wants to see her as much as he can in these final moments. He promise. But he can't let this be the last time he sees her either. For Yuri's sake, he has to promise her it won't be the last time. Akutani opens his eyes so he can tell her, I promise. The sun had long since set, lights in the top floor apartment, a clear indication of someone being home. So why the occupant doesn't respond to Himiko Toga's shrill shout of his name, Akaya Tainii, as drawn out as it may be, still remains a wonder to her. The blonde raps her knuckles against the door, not for the first time, as she leans an ear to it. Despite receiving no response after yet another failure, she remains firmly planted at the welcome mat. Her next whine isn't any less indignant, come on, I know you're home. Only when she follows it with a threat, don't make me bust the door down. Does she finally get a response? It's open. Akutani speaks at a much lower decibel, making the girl's straining worthwhile. Himiko balks at the revelation, really? Before actually trying the knob. When it turns and the door swings open, she shakes her head in further exaggerated disbelief. That's not a good way to prevent robberies, you know. She shuts the door behind her as though to emphasize her point. Akutani doesn't play long, his energy dwindled to the point of non-existence. He sprawled across his couch in a pair of black shorts and a white t-shirt, one arm hanging loosely over the side that his hand touches the floor. His voice still low enough to be a whisper, what are you doing here, Himiko? He lazily drawls a question. Though admittedly surprised by the boy's attitude, Himiko isn't wavered by it. She has a pep in the steps that carry her over to his bedside. I went to Antiku to surprise you, but your boss said you called in sick today. She then hoists up a shopping bag that Akutani had failed to notice earlier, so I brought you some medicine. Himiko pauses, seemingly noticing the drugs she bought the same time he does. Before he can even get the chance to sit up and sift through the bag's contents himself, she's already doing her own rummaging. Oh, wait. Does medicine taste bad to you too? She recalls the side effect of the Ghoul's Quirk as she searches for something to give him. Ah, it tastes bad for everyone anyways. Taking the bag from her, Akutani sets it on the floor in a particular spot where nobody will trip over it. I'm not sick. That was just an excuse to not have to work. He finally raises his voice to a normal frequency, so he can quell any concerns for his health. Huh? That isn't like you. Himiko tilts her head in confusion. She hadn't expected that of him. She just as quickly dismisses the lie to his boss though, concern shifted to other matters. You owe me 800 yen then. She gestures to the medicine she bought before glancing around the apartment, where's Eri? Reminded of the real reason for his sudden reclusiveness, Akutani plops back down onto the cushioning of his couch. He may as well rip it off like a band-aid and tell it to her straight, he figures. The heroes and police found me. He closes his eyes in anticipation of what he's sure will be a rambunctious response. You let them take her. His expectations are met when Himiko shouts incredulously at him. It didn't take her long to connect the dots and realize the reason for Yuri's absence based on the bomb he dropped. He really doesn't want to deal with this right now. He's already trying to process what happened himself and his own emotions. He heaves out a heavy sigh, sinking deeper into the couch, hoping that it'll swallow him up. When it doesn't, he forces himself to open his eyes in order to fix Himiko with a hard stare. What else was I supposed to do? He genuinely wants to know what other choice he had in the matter. Himiko throws her hands up in the air. Whether the gesture be because she feels the answer is obvious or that she herself doesn't know is only unclear for a mere moment. Fight them. Rip them apart. Something. Her suggestions fly out with swipes of her hands that make her spiral and fall on the couch beside Akatani. He shakes his head with what minimal energy he can muster. It was a hero. Not the Yakuza. What's the difference so long as they're trying to take Eri from you? Himiko crosses her arms under her small bust as she challenges Akatani on his excuse. He glances up at her in disbelief, taken aback by the sincerity in her tone. He'd forgotten about this side to her. Himiko had proven a few times that she can be a bit intense. He just hadn't expected her to suggest he kill heroes on top of criminals. He was certain that they agreed a line must be drawn somewhere. The difference is that the Yakuza wanted to hurt Eri. This hero wants to help. He assumes that she's just being protective of the little girl. But when he sees the same sincerity in her eyes as she says, Akatani, you should know by now that heroes don't want to help people like us. He knows it's more than having an attachment to Eri. For her, it's personal. Akatani's brows furrow, his frustration leaking into his expression. It's not like he doesn't care about Eri too. It's just that he trusts heroes a little more than she does. Deep down inside, he's still a hero otaku. Plus, he had a fair amount of time to get acquainted with Eraserhead. This one is different. I can tell. He knows not all heroes are like All Might, good or bad as that comparison may be. Himiko huffs, still not taking him seriously. Does your quirk make you psychic too now? Her sarcastic remark has Akatani sitting up to address her on a more personal level. Wanting to be taken seriously and for his word to hold some merit, Akatani recalls the incident more vividly. He could have erased my quirk, Himiko. A SWAT team could have shot me full of tranquilizers, or a team of heroes could have overpowered me before I even knew what happened. They had the element of surprise. The hardness in his tone is its own sincerity. Hearing how easily he could have been captured, Himiko lowers her guard a little. Her eyes soften and she uncrosses her arms, thinking about how close of a call Akatani being cornered truly was. So why didn't they? Her voice wobbles as it sways between anger and sorrow. Seeing how difficult it is for her to process the news, Akatani takes Himiko's hand in his own, as an attempt to comfort her. He wanted to talk to me first. He wanted to give me a chance. He gives her hand a soft squeeze to let her know he's still there for her. If that's not a real hero, then I don't know what is. Himiko looks as though she wants to say more, continue trying to dispute the decision to hand Eri over, but refrains. Instead, she admits defeat as well. Her shoulders drop and her head hangs. So that's it. You're just giving up. Seeing the fight drain from her system, Akatani allows his own to fade. Like I said, a hero has her. She's in good hands. Probably better than mine. His gaze falls to he and Himiko's intertwined fingers. Why are you so opposed? Himiko stares off into the distance, looking at nothing nor no one in particular. Heroes take away the things I want. When her eyes return to Akatani, he lifts his head to meet them, the things that I love. The boy blushes at the slight confession, but forces himself to maintain eye contact as she continues speaking. They took Eri away. And they almost took you too. Love. Akatani nearly chokes on the word. He pulls away and coughs into the hand that he was using to hold Himiko's. Whatever. They let me off the hook. Sorta. He shakes his head to clear away any romantic thoughts and returns the conversation to its original point of origin. My point is that you don't have to worry about them locking me up, and Eri is just as free. Himiko blinks in reaction to his reaction. Having already had one intense conversation for the day though, she decides to save that one for another time. What do I need to worry about then? She sighs while standing up. You're going to make me stress eat. She travels from the couch to the kitchen while asking, you still have food in your fridge? Though the topic of discussion is no longer about heroes, Akatani isn't quite able to forget about Eri. After all, she's the only reason why the place is stocked with ordinary food. And the cabinets. Help yourself. He falls back onto the couch with just as heavy a heart as he had when Himiko first intruded. Himiko raids the fridge while saying, I'm no hero, but I want to help you, Akatani. And returns with a bright red apple. Eri's favorite. If the heroes can take Eri, then let me take you away, yeah. She takes a bite from the fruit once she arrives back at the couch. Having already exhausted what energy he could muster to argue with her, he isn't prepared for what the blonde has up her sleeve now. Akatani lolls his head to the side, eyelids drooping just as much. What do you mean? There's a glimmer in the blonde's eye that wakes Akatani back up. Instead of laying around here sulking all day, let's go on a date. She holds out her free hand for him to take. Akatani pauses just as he's about to grab it, a D-date. He'd like to blame his short-circuited brain on being drowsy, considering they'd already been on one before according to her. Himiko finishes the reach for him and takes his hand in hers. Yeah. It'll cheer you up. I don't know. But the boy is still much too reluctant to move just yet. Himiko tugs on his arm, trying to get him to budge. Come on. It'll be fun. But to no avail. Only when the blonde resorts to violence by throwing her apple at his head does he give in. Alright. Alright, fine. He groans like an old man with weak knees as he stands up to go. But of course, their date night is that of two teens. They're young and full of vigor. Nor are they ordinary. Roaming rooftops brings them closer to the stars. Spring in their step carries them from building to building. Akatani's mask warms his face when the cool breeze brushes through his hair. The type of thrill that they get from this above-average form of parkour is greater than any simple type of outing. There's nothing quite like a hunt to a predator. Even if Akatani is no longer allowed to eat his quarry, there's something about the actual action of instinct. When they come across a purse snatcher who's completely oblivious to their stalking, there's no comparison to that kind of euphoria. The ghoul drops from above, tentacles wrapping the prey using powerful suctions. Momentum of the strike throwing coils around the victim's body. The red limbs constrict, going for a quick suffocation. They squeeze. Every time the prey exhales, they squeeze a little more tightly. Himiko doesn't even get a chance to do anything herself. She draws back and watches as Akatani handles the purse snatcher himself. Normally, she'd be content with doing so. It's enticing to her to watch the ghoul hunt. However, this is notably different from those other times. He's not enjoying it himself. Not truly. There's something smaller than the red speck in his kakugan which spurs him on. Akatani always hunts with aggression. The release of rage is always evident. Except, there's no burst of agony this time. Blood doesn't spill, and none of that sorrow is shed. He nearly rips the purse snatcher apart, but he stops himself. He holds back for the sake of the promise he made to Eraserhead. The thief is rendered unconscious instead, let off easy. Acts of vigilantism, regardless of restraint, is sure to still cause him trouble. And yet, it's not even worth it to him. As he leaps from roof to roof with Himiko in search of another criminal to vent through, he feels just as empty as he did when leaving his apartment. Himiko spends the rest of the night in a similar state of unrest. She studies Akatani rather than joining in, no longer having any fun either. However, there's no knowing what the ghoul's face looks like as he does all this. There's no telling what sort of sad expression he's making. Nobody knows when he has a mask to hide it. Antiku's wooden floor had aged, its boards creaking under the pressure of every step. Even though it's just another routinal day at the coffee shop, Akatani can't help but feel although he's being trampled upon just the same. The passing customers don't demand much, just for him to pour coffee from a silver pot into their blue onion flower cups arrayed at each table. Yet, the tin feels heavy enough in his hand to be a dumbbell. The young barista absent-mindedly places a dessert plate decorated with a caramel flan on one of the tables. He'd normally be anxious under the anticipation of waiting on Eraserhead given ordinary circumstances, but his excursion last night has him extra stressed. If the underground hero found out he's still operating as a vigilante, regardless of restraint, he worries that he'd really no longer be able to see Eri. Every time the door chime indicates another customer, Akatani's head swivels to see if it's the little girl and her new guardian. He instead notices what's playing inaudibly from a television mounted above the checkout counter. It's across the way from where the boy is currently standing, so that he can see it at the perfect angle. What's being shown has him just as entranced as he was with his own thoughts. The morning news covers a story about Japan's most prestigious hero school. Apparently, the UA barrier was destroyed. Or rather, it was disintegrated. Already, Akatani speculates the reasons and possibilities as to how and why. It had recently been announced that All Might began teaching there. A reporter or member of the paparazzi could have simply wanted to get a big scoop. However, there's always the concern of more sinister motives. Before the boy can get too lost in thought, his mind is returned to its original focus. The door chime alerts him to their arrival before he hears Eri's gleeful, "Akatanai." That's the only warning he gets before a little blur covers the span of the cafe to slam straight into his legs. Overwhelmed with an equally delighted emotion, Akatani can't help but laugh with somewhat relative relief. It's from an awkward angle that he has to bend down at the waist, but he happily returns the little girl's hug. "I miss you too, Eri." The smile on his face is genuine as he takes in her presence. As though they'll take her away from him again, he lifts his head to check on the others that came through the door. Aizawa isn't alone. Accompanying him is the detective, Namasa. Akatani eyes them for a moment, lowering his voice for Eri alone. "Have they been treating you well?" When he feels Eri not against his legs, the rest of him loosens. The tense tightening of his shoulders lets them drop a little. Whether it's because the detective heard or saw Akatani's concern for the girl, nobody can be sure. It's his job to be perceptive. Namasa tries to reassure the boy with a smile. She's in good hands. It's the best attempt at comfort that he can offer. But Akatani isn't in the best of moods to perceive it as an attempt of peace. "I didn't ask you." His words have a bite to them that reminds the detective of how animalistic the boy can be. That the young barista isn't an average teenager. He's the Tokyo Ghoul. Aizawa takes a step forward, the foot meant to be put in between the two opposing sides of law each one represents. She's safe. His assurances seem to reach Akatani instead of the detectives. Suddenly, it's a reminder that he is the one caring for Eri and not Namasa, putting Akatani at ease. "You can trust us." Aizawa's eyes meet the boy's to let him know that he's sincere. Akatani holds Eri closer to him anyways. Having her there in his arms helps to calm his nerves, but he still can't help but shake his worries. Not after what the television showed. The UA barrier. I saw on the news, he starts to vocalize his concern, but gets stopped short. Everything's under control. Aizawa is quick to lay Akatani's worry yet again. He sounds so sure of himself. Akatani remembers that the man is not just a pro hero, but a teacher at the hero school too. He's on the front lines in both potentially dangerous scenarios. But it's because of that lifestyle that Akatani is worried in the first place. Is it? She could have been hurt. He doesn't want to consider what would have happened if somebody malicious had broken into a place to hurt children. Aizawa's eyes narrow just the slightest bit. The slight glare makes Akatani realize how hypocritical he's being. It's not like his own vigilante lifestyle had given Eri the safest living environment. UA's teacher's lounge is one of the safest and most secure places she can be. He makes a fair point that heroes are there to protect her as well. But Aizawa isn't looking him in the eye anymore. Namasa looks over at the underground hero with a bit of surprise, then back at Akatani. The motion doesn't go unnoticed. The detective sighs before saying, "Come on, Aizawa. The kid doesn't need my quirk to know that was a lie." Aizawa's stare switches to Namasa, "It wasn't." And that makes the detective pause momentarily. Namasa waits a second before shaking it off. Then, he explains. The barrier being destroyed so that the paparazzi and reporters could get in wasn't an accident. We're investigating whether this deliverance was malicious or just for the sake of some lucky scoop on All Might. And Akatani is grateful for him not sugarcoating the truth at the very least. Aizawa hangs his head, ashamed for having hidden that truth from the boy who had entrusted Eri to him. Having it out in the open now, it was a declaration of war. A distraction. He shares his own outlook on it. Namasa raises a brow in the underground hero's direction. "I thought taking care of a child would get you to drop your conspiracy theory hobby. I don't think it's just a conspiracy. It did seem strange." Akatani defends Aizawa's reasoning with his own suspicions. Seeing the detective isn't quite as easily convinced, Aizawa elaborates. "In all the years UA has prospered, has it ever once been infiltrated like today?" His question makes Namasa swallow whatever retort had been on the tip of his tongue prior to that thought. The detective considers that factor. However, it's something that'll have to be mulled over in his office and not a coffee shop. Enough. This isn't something to be discussed in front of civilian children. He ends it there before he and Aizawa overshare something important about the investigation. Especially since, and I'm saying that lightly when not taking other components into account, Akatani has his own criminal record. He stares at the boy, not seeing a hint of ghoulish evil hidden in him. No offense. Akatani shrugs impassively, none taken. Interjecting herself into the conversation now that it's essentially ended, Akatani. Eri tentatively looks up at the boy she's latched onto. His smile returning to put her at ease, Akatani looks down to meet her gaze. Yeah. His voice is much softer with her than it was with the adults. But Eri still hesitates. She shyly looks away before requesting, "Can you tell Todoroki and Shinso-sen I said hi?" Akatani's eyes widen briefly, surprised by the affectionate nicknames she had given their friends. It seems that he isn't the only one that she's missed seeing. His smile wobbles a bit as he holds back tears. "I sure can." And he ruffles her hair much to her dismay. Listening in, Aizawa's own eyes widen in shock as well. He recognizes the names of the boys Eri mentioned, one of which is a student in his class. He's not sure what their connection to the boy and girl is, but as curious as he is, he decides to let it go for now. The rest of Eri's visit to Antiku is a lot more enjoyable for her and Akatani. The mood takes a more light-hearted tone when Yashimura joins in on the reunion. They enjoy each other's time and company, not taking any of it for granted. But sooner or later, it ends. Eri leaves with Aizawa, and Akatani is left alone again. All he has after she's gone to remember her by is the promise he made to her. He goes to the Quirk support group so that he can keep his word. As expected, the coffee machine in the hallway is where he runs into Shinso first. "I thought I'd find you here." He jokingly greets the fellow insomniac and coffee addict. Shinso steps aside so that Akatani can fish his own canned coffee from the vending machine. "I should be saying that to you." When Akatani's back is turned, Shinso allows a lazy smile to cross his face. "Long time, no see." Hearing Shinso, Akatani scratches the back of his head, as though he'll be able to dig out a proper excuse for his absence. "I've been a bit busy," is all he manages to come up with. Shinso shrugs like he doesn't care, though he probably secretly does. It helps him to avoid being accused of having affection by blaming the other boy Akatani came to see. Todoroki barely comes around anymore either. "I think he was a little disappointed that I was the only one showing up." Hearing that and remembering his last conversation with Todoroki, having promised to see him again during sessions here, Akatani feels a pang of guilt in his chest. "I'm a terrible friend, aren't I?" His body sinks with his sulking voice by literally sinking. "But a better brother." Shinso tries to cheer him up, not knowing better of Akatani's current situation. Speaking of which, where is Eri? She's normally attached to your leg. He glances around in search for the little girl. Akatani's demeanor doesn't quite change aside from mild fidgeting, as he searches for a proper response. He eventually lands on, her dad wanted to see her. A technical half-lie considering Aizawa had to adopt her. He pulls from his own family history to make it a little more believably personal. He lives in America, so. Shinso solemnly nods as he takes in the lie, believing it. I get it. His consoling expression makes Akatani feel all the more guilty for withholding the truth. You probably already miss her, huh? Is it that obvious? But there's no need to lie about that. Well, Shinso hides his face with his canned coffee. Don't forget you have, friends. That are here for you. Taking a sip afterwards so Akatani can't see his blush. Taken aback by Shinso's rare show of affection, Akatani is startled into silence. He cracks open his own coffee before also taking a sip, sharing the boy's embarrassment. Anyways, Eri wanted me to tell you, before she left, that she said hi. He averts his eyes before adding, you and Todoroki go to UA, right? Shinso lowers his coffee, stopping from taking another sip. Yeah. He's surprised by the question, but dismisses it just as quickly, except I'm in Gen Ed. Remember? He presumes Akatani is just curious about the hero course. Never mind that. But Akatani surprises him yet again. Shinso waits to hear the rest, curious as to what this could be about. Be careful. He certainly wasn't expecting a warning. That's not ominous at all. Shinso raises a brow that gives him an expression oddly reminiscent of Aizawa. Akatani swallows despite having not taken another sip of coffee. The UA barrier being destroyed. He hesitates before explaining his reason for concern. I don't think that it was coincidental. He pauses one last time before trying to smooth it over. I'm just saying to be cautious is all. Shinso continues to stare at Akatani. Skeptically. Perhaps even warily. Then he mumbles a, thanks. Still not quite sure what the boy means. I don't know how or why you know that. His eyes meet Akatani's, but you be careful too. It started as a tapping. Little flicks against the glass shielding Akatani from the outside. As the sky darkened with storm clouds, however, the spears of water became thicker. Rain now rattles the windows as the droplets yell at him. He doesn't know if it's some sort of animalistic instinct, but it almost sounds as though nature is warning him. The world is trying to tell him something. Something that he would only know soaked by the cold touch of darkness, and not hidden away in the warm comfort of Antiku. He remembers what it's like. Water running down his face like tears. His hair matted and damp. Clothes drenched. The blood pouring down on him like the rain, and the only difference between the two being one's cool sting versus the other's warm stick. Akatani shakes his head to clear away those thoughts. The urge to feel the liquid on his skin again still lingers. The desire to taste it. He runs his tongue along his chapped lips, suddenly aware of how dry they are. Akatani drinks some of the coffee that he's supposed to be selling, hoping that it'll be enough to quench his thirst. He hopes that the only reason he's parched is because of the monsoon right outside the cafe. The ghoul knows that's not the truth though. That's just an excuse. Akatani knows what's actually happening. He hasn't told Eraserhead. He's not quite sure he wants to even admit it to himself. The erasure meals aren't working. They do. For a while. However, it's a more temporary fix than previously presumed. There are two problems. The first is that he's not satisfied with regular food anymore. He had thought having his tastabids return to normal would be the best thing that could happen to him, but it's comparable to having vegetables when he could be enjoying a big slice of chocolate cake. His mouth has developed a craving for flesh. The second issue is a much more concerning matter. Akatani is fairly certain that the erasure has only been increasing his appetite for flesh and blood. Eating an average meal does satisfy his hunger just like any other person. However, just like any other person, he gets hungry again later. Except, it seems his hunger is tenfold. He no longer feels famished, but very much starved. He's been checking the clock during his shifts, and he's also willing to bet that the intervals in between meals before he gets hungry again has been drastically dropping in time. It went from losing minutes to hours. Akatani's nails dig into the counter like a set of claws, scratching at the wood. He feels like a caged animal. He's suddenly aware of how trapped he is. The pounding on the window is the wild stone jungle he'd familiarized himself with as a hunting ground. Now he waits for his meals to be brought to him and served. He impatiently growls, teeth gritted and grinding. Aizawa hadn't shown up for lunch, which is annoying. Yet, he understands the man teaches at UA during the day. It's excusable and understandable. What's as frustrating as it is equally concerning is that the underground hero should be able to manage bringing dinner during his night shift. Akatani checks the clock again. Eraserhead is running late. He's never late, and this is by far later than usual if there is such a thing as late. The rainstorm suddenly feels like a much worse omen than it previously did. If the ghoul really does have such a thing as instinct based on nature's weather, then that means something bad must have happened. Akatani starts mulling over the possibilities for Aizawa's tardiness. It could be something as simple as his duties being a teacher. Perhaps he had to hold a student after class, or the principal called for a meeting. Maybe Yuri needed tending to. Akatani would be forgiving of the man's tardiness if the reason is parenthood for his technically adopted sister. The worst outcome comes to mind as well though. There's a chance that something bad happened. Eraserhead is an underground hero who fights criminals and villains alike. Akatani's pupils contract. Red veins begin to stem from his eyes. He stares hard at nothing in particular, an angry glare he wishes he had something to fixate on. The pressure of his fingers pressing into the cashier counter, start causing it to splinter, nails carving into the wooden structure. His heart beats in his chest like a drum, loud enough to be the thunder that the storm outside is missing. The ghoul begins to worry about the safety of the pro-hero who's taken Eri under his wing. If Aizawa is in danger, the protective older brother worries that his sister could be in trouble by extension. Akatani seethes through his teeth, biting back a feral shout that he wishes he could direct at whoever dares endanger Eri. The door chime brings Akatani back to reality, his mind reeling with his body as he jumps back. When he releases his grip on the counter, wood shavings fly up in the air with his hand. His pupils dilate until they're back to normal, and the veins bulging from his eyes recede just as quickly. His flow of black hair whips to the side when he turns his head to see who entered the shop, the locks still covering one side of his face. He's surprised to see Namasa instead of Aizawa, the detective's overcoat drenched from the monsoon. Judging by Namasa's expression, the man is as equally disturbed as the boy. His rectangular eyes meet Akatani's, a solemn silence communicating what the boy already knows. Akatani would cry, but the storm is already shedding enough tears for him with its downpour of rain. Where's Eraserhead? Akatani asks the question anyways. Though he knows the answer. Though he doesn't want to hear it confirmed. In his mind, rationally, there would be no other reason for the detective to come see him instead. Namasa looks off to the side, breaking eye contact. There was an incident. He begins. His words are slow. He's treading lightly, so as not to spook a wild animal. Akatani tenses anyways. The wet squelch of the detective's shoes on the floor alerts Akatani to the man's attempt at subtly moving closer. When Namasa sees the boy flinch back, he stops. The next few seconds that pass aren't quite a standoff. However, there's tension radiating between the two. It makes Namasa hesitate. He's never sure of himself when in the presence of the ghoul. He never knows how to interact with a boy who's also capable of creating the crime scenes he's seen. You don't have to come, but he's requesting to speak with you. But those words must be the right ones to have said. Akatani's visible eye widens, the green within glowing with childlike hopefulness. There's an unspoken stutter from the boy's end that he tries to cover up, but Namasa notes it in his memory. When Akatani recovers, he speaks with a hardened resolve that doesn't quite make it to his gaze. Take me to him. Akatani had assumed the worst. The storm. Aizawa's absence. Namasa's arrival. The unelaborated incident that the detective spoke of. It all pointed to another person leaving his life. Not just his, but Eri's, who needs the underground hero most. He sighs to nobody in particular, frustration and relief blending like gasoline and water. Now he's in a police cruiser headed for UA. Neither of the two locations did he ever think he'd be in, let alone for the reasons that he is and will be. His gaze falls to his lap, not quite sure of where to look in the vehicle, and unwilling to stare at Detective Namasa. But he is, at the very least, still willing to speak. He wants to know more about what happened, even if he's already conjured up his own resolution in his head. Does this have to do with the barrier being broken? Akatani nervously fidgets with his fingers. Akatani can feel Namasa's eyes on him, the detective taking his eyes off the road momentarily to glance over at the boy. He had been kind enough not to stick Akatani in the back, allowing him to sit up front in the passenger seat. Something about the equal sitting up front is an assurance that this isn't an arrest. Yes. A group of villains broke into the USJ during a class trip there. Akatani stops fiddling with his hands and lifts his head to return the detective's gaze upon hearing that. But Namasa has already returned his attention to the road, saying the rest. The barrier was a distraction for them to steal a schedule. Namasa's grip on the steering wheel tightens. Aizawa's theory was right all along. You two were right to think something was suspicious. Akatani can sense the frustration coming from the man. Radiating in wafts of smell through his sweat, the ghoul picks up on Namasa's feelings through more than just his words. You couldn't have known for sure. Don't blame yourself. Akatani tries consoling the detective as best as he can without touching him. He's not up to a hug or anything, and he doubts Namasa is either. Especially considering they're in the middle of driving right now. But he does want to try to be of some consolation. He can tell that the detective is genuinely trying his best. Namasa huffs, not really valuing the boy's words. He does appreciate the gesture though, thanks, kid. Offering a small smile in return. Akatani can tell that it's fake, having utilized false faces before himself, but he doesn't say anything more. When the unlikely duo finally reaches UA, Namasa leads Akatani to the medbay. Not the nurse's office. Where he's at is a room not likely meant for students. one reserved for overnight patients with more severe or critical cases, like Eraserhead. When Akutami sees Aizawa, he's not even sure that the man is the underground hero at first. So many bandages wrap Aizawa head to toe that his face is practically concealed in gauze. Akutami's fingers curl into his palm, nails cutting into the skin of his hand that's now clenched as a fist. Who did this to you? He can't suppress the shaking in his voice, as well as he can the tremors of his body. Luckily, the detective and the underground hero mistaken the reason as worry and not rage. Naomasa sees Aizawa struggling to speak, so he hands the teacher a glass of water while answering for him. They call themselves the League of Villains. Akutami's not sure if the next bit is a jab at him, or if it's meant to be a joke, friends of yours. But he takes the question rather personally of an insult. Can't say they are. The venom in his tone has Naomasa swallowing at the same time Aizawa takes a sip of water. Akutami then momentarily redirects his attention, noticing a certain absence in the room. His head swivels left to right as he scours the area before asking, "Where's Eri?" Having wetted his vocal cords, Aizawa takes the chance to answer that one. "Don't worry, she was here at the teacher's lounge with all might." Akutami's heart beats quicker at the mention of the number one hero. She was nowhere near the attack. Hearing Eri was under the care of the world's strongest hero puts Akutami at ease, but he quickly recovers from his starstruck stupor to emphasize, "Where is she now though?" With his ashi, Aizawa pauses when he realizes his mistake before correcting himself. "I mean present Mick." Akutami inwardly beams at the mention of another hero, but doesn't let himself outwardly show any signs of excitement. Aizawa takes the stoic disposition as a sign of skepticism. "Don't worry. Mick is a close friend of mine. He can be trusted with her." Aizawa purposefully doesn't mention Nimuri's involvement though. He's not sure how the ghoul would react to his little sister being watched by an R-rated heron. Not that Nimuri would influence a girl Eri's age. Akutami allows himself to relax a little bit at that, knowing that Eri is safe. He subtly feels like a storm drain, the downpour outside, knocking him down into a cushioned seat at Aizawa's bedside. "Kid." The wounded hero grunts when he tries to sit up. Naomasa also moves with a concerned demeanor. But Akutami waves them both off, dismissing their worries. "Thank you." He can tell that Aizawa is making a confused expression by the way the bandages around his face crease and fold, so he elaborates, "For not bringing her to the USJ. He's not sure what he would have done if Eri were harmed. Or worse. For what it's worth. I'm glad that I didn't either." Aizawa rests his eyes by closing them. His body sinks back into the cushioning of the hospital bed's mattress. He seems just as relieved. Akutami then realizes just how exhausted each and every one of them truly are. Naomasa slumps into a chair on the opposite side of Akutami and Aizawa, almost defeated in tune. They both look like they've taken a beating. Akutami supposes Aizawa has in a literal sense. These are the two that he entrusted to Eri. It's not that he doesn't see they clearly tried, but Akutami starts to regret his decision. He regrets decreasing his activity as the ghoul. Maybe he would have noticed the significant decrease in villain activity leading up to a league of them. He could have potentially seen the attack on USJ coming and maybe he would have participated in it. Akutami rests his head in his hands, the thought weighing heavily on him. He wonders if he actually would have been a part of the villain attack had Eraserhead not found him. Not with Eri. He knows that if he hadn't handed her over to them, then he wouldn't have gotten involved with villains. He wonders if he would have become one without her though. He wonders what kind of path that he was on before. Naomasa called him a vigilante, but Toga had called him a villain. According to society, there isn't very much of a difference between the two categories. If all he wants is to help himself to a huge meal like the Yakuza, then an entire class of students wouldn't have been a bad place to pick up from where he left off. Akutami shakes his head, letting his hands fall from his face. He knows that he's not thinking rationally. That he's just hungry. It's his ghoulish cravings talking, not him. When he begins to starve, he doesn't care who it is that he devours, he'll just eat. Like when he ate his mother. He knows that if he hadn't met Aizawa, he would have just stuck to eating villains. Maybe the League would have been victims to the ghoul long before the attack on USJ could have taken place. "Kid." Aizawa's voice sounds distant. So far away that it's barely worth calling a whisper. "Kid." But the repetition is a little louder that time. It's enough to pull Akutami from the depths of his thoughts, so that he doesn't drown in the ocean that the storm outside had made. When he breaks the surface, he gasps for air. He sees Aizawa and Naomasa staring at him expectantly. For what, he doesn't know. His breath hitches and he shivers from the cold that seems to have worked its way inside. "I asked if you're hungry." He certainly wasn't expecting to hear that. Aizawa's tone is as soft as his bloodshot eyes though. It's not accusatory. It's not harsh or reprimanding. The underground hero is genuinely asking out of concern. Akutami's stomach growls in response, making him blush. He's not sure what gave him away before his body betrayed him, but he nods in embarrassed admittance. "Yeah, but you're in no condition to." He tries denying the offer anyways, since he knows the process is strenuating for the hero. "There's some leftovers from the cafeteria that you can't have. Naomasa can get it for you." but Aizawa is quick to cut Akutani off. Sure. Namasa nods before pushing off with his knees to stand up. Sit tight while I get you some grub, kid. His overcoat gets discarded, hung over the chairs back to dry, before he heads for the sliding door. Akutani is about to make another attempt of refusal, but he doesn't have to when the nurse makes her entry from the other side of the door. He recognizes her as her cavalry girl, a short older lady who uses a cane to hobble in. What's this I hear about using your quirk? Namasa is amazed by the woman's acute skill of deduction, considering they didn't mention Aizawa's quirk per se. The way that the elder heroine uses her cane as a third leg makes Akutani view her as a wounded animal, the limb mimicking the loss of a fourth limb. Despite her mild handicap, she still manages to close the distance between the entrance and Aizawa's bed rather quickly. Didn't I tell you that you received damage to your eyes? Her tiny head shakes in disapproval as she starts to remove the gauze around his face. I haven't even changed your bandages yet. When Akutani sees the gnarly cut beneath the underground hero's right eye, he can't withhold a gasp. It's still healing, but it's sure to leave a permanent deep scar. For someone whose quirk relies on sight to function, the time of usage will no doubt diminish. It's not as bad as it looks, kid. Aizawa tries assuring the boy, but his nurse wears an expression that says otherwise. Now is a critical time to be healing. It's best if you don't use your quirk for a few weeks, at the very least. Recovery girl gives her doctor's orders while applying a fresh clean set of bandages to hide the gash. But Aizawa isn't persuaded. The boy can only eat if he tries explaining Akutani's situation in defense of the situation. But Akutani is quick to cut him off. It's okay. The outburst draws everybody's attention, making Akutani recoil and shrink in on himself. Knowing Eraserhead's health is on the line though, he can't allow himself to back down. I am not hungry. So he lies. Are you sure? You shouldn't go weeks without eating. Aizawa's bandages crease with concern. And despite recovery girl's care for her patient, she too shares that same sentiment. Akutani stands up, nodding a little more forcefully than necessary, attempting to come across as confident. I've done it before. He turns to hide his face from them, forgetting that Namasa is on the other side when he says the rest. I would try not to eat for as long as I could. Akutani's eyes widen when he sees the detective staring at him in bewilderment. Whatever Namasa saw, Akutani ducks his head down to cover up. The boy slides his hands into his pockets, not wanting to fidget with them or ball them into fists. He feels in his pants the familiar leather mask of his ghoul persona. The thought of hunting on a rainy night is so alluring that he salivates a little. So long as you continue to keep that restraint, then there's nothing to worry about. Namasa's voice draws his gaze back up. The detective is wearing a stern expression, but his eyes appear so trusting that it hurts to look into them for too long. Akutani averts his gaze. He's been given a chance he doesn't deserve. They're willing to trust him, to rehabilitate him, and he's about to throw that all away. To be fair, they'd only been fooling themselves. They were on borrowed time before Aizawa's accident. Who they had been kidding, Akutani doesn't know. All he does know is that their way didn't work. He tried. He really did. But what he's done and what he's about to do is his fundamental nature. The ghoul vows right then and there to find the one responsible for harming Aizawa and to satisfy his hunger that way. You're going to be fine, right? Aizawa asks from behind him. Akutani turns around to face the hero, beaming the brightest smile he can muster, teeth and all. Yeah. He enthusiastically lies again. The clatter of tin against glass follows a canned coffee down into the disposable at the bottom of the vending machine. Akutani reaches in and takes the beverage, popping the lid open with a flick of his thumb. He was surprised that he didn't find Shinso loitering by the machine. Then again, he was very much relieved as well. He didn't come to the Quirk support group meeting place for idle chit-chat this time. Akutani. A blonde blur rams into the boy all too suddenly. He nearly drops his drink, startled from his very brief thoughts. When he sees that it's the girl he called to meet him, he relaxes a little. Hey Himiko. His eyes shift from her to another presence. The guy with patches of gnarled and wrinkled skin covering much of his face and neck looks about the place with disinterest. Who's your friend? Akutani feels the need to ask. The obvious burn victim turns his gaze to meet Akutani's, eyes dripping in boredom as he introduces himself, Dobby. Akutani can't help but raise a brow at the name. Dobby just raises a brow right back. He texted me saying you wanted me to introduce you to more of my friends. Himiko finally detaches herself from Akutani to present Dobby with a mild flourish, so I thought I'd just bring one along. Akutani's eyes widen momentarily, remembering that he did indeed do that. Oh. He steps forward to introduce himself in return, bowing at the waist to be respectful. Sorry for being rude. I'm Akutani Mikumo. Dobby doesn't seem fazed in the slightest. He's back to inspecting his surroundings, searching for something amongst the nothing. So, quirk counseling. His drawl is as impassive as he looks. He doesn't seem impressed by Akutani nor the location. Not exactly. The boy chuckles awkwardly as he returns to standing up straight. Trying to think of a way to break the ice, he winds up scratching the back of his head. Feeling his hair course through his fingers, Akatani perks up, finding something to say. What brand hair dye did you use? He nods his head in indication to Dabi's black pointed hair. Dabi falters, taken aback by the question. His shock quickly turns into something else, eyes narrowing. At least Akatani has his attention now. How did you? Akatani points to his own hair, takes one to no one. Returns a shock from Himiko next. The blonde bounces back over to the boy, leaning into his personal space. You dye your hair. Her yellow eyes glint in the light as she asks, what color is it normally? Akatani hesitates, unsure of whether or not he should answer. Then he remembers that this is Himiko. Even with Dabi listening in, he sighs and relents. Green. But his cheeks are bright red. Ew. I can picture that. Himiko plays with the boy's curly hair by twirling it around her fingers. She imagines the color matching the blood that's rushing to his face, and how he'd be lit up like a Christmas tree, giggling to herself. When Himiko switches her sights to Dabi, she's expecting him to share his natural hair color as well. The boy covered in burned sighs. All the stress you give me made my hair turn white, so I had no choice but to dye it. But Akatani is relieved that he's capable of dry humor at the very least. Akatani laughs, agreeing wholeheartedly with Dabi. Do you think I could be her next victim? He asks in between guffaws. Himiko looks between the two boys before pouting, you two sure are getting along rather quickly, and crosses her arms under her bust. Yeah, well. Dabi turns his body away from them as though he's ready to leave. I'm not really the social butterfly. If it's a friend that you were wanting. Akatani suddenly remembers the reason that he called Himiko here, and had asked her to introduce him to her friends. Oh, no. No, he winces when he realizes it came out wrong. I mean yes, but Dabi lingers in between Akatani and the exit, forcing Akatani to get to the point. I'm looking for. The boy just isn't sure how to word it. You wouldn't happen to be a part of a league, would you? Dabi looks more confused than he did previously. A league. Responding quizzically. Akatani shakes his head, never mind. Before turning back to Himiko. I just thought because of Yuta and his connection to the Yakuza, that maybe you'd know where I could find. He realizes that he should have been more direct with her a little too late. Sighing to himself, he tries to explain, there's some bad people I'm looking for and... He trails off when he sees the expression of hurt in Himiko's face. He realizes how much smaller she is than him when he hears her soft whimper, you associate me with bad. No? Akatani blurts out in an initial panic. He fumbles over himself as much as his words, not knowing whether he should say something or hug her. I just... Dabi makes a strange noise from behind him before he gets the chance to apologize. When Akatani turns to see what the weird sound was about, he sees Dabi's non-scarred skin is rather pale. And that the burned boy's blue eyes are fixated on a newcomer. Shoto Todoroki approaches them from the opposite direction. Nakumo. Todoroki nods in greeting to the boy that he recognizes before glancing between Himiko and Dabi. Who are your friends? T. Todoroki. Akatani feels sweat beating down his forehead as he's surrounded by the bunch of familiar faces. The only way this situation could possibly get worse is if Shinso suddenly materialized out of thin air to join them. He swallows, trying to get the right words to come out of his throat, but nothing coming up. Ooh. His head swivels back to Himiko first. The blonde has hidden her hurt, faking a smile as she waves to Todoroki. Himiko Toga. Her introduction is briefer than usual, but Akatani is admittedly relieved that's the case. Are you Akatani's friend? Yes. Todoroki doesn't sound very sure of that answer, but Akatani passes it off as part of the tension in the awkward situation. After all, Dabi isn't paying Todoroki any mind. He's been frozen in place, pale flesh tone making Akatani believe he really could have succumbed to frostbite. Todoroki returns his attention to Akatani, mutually ignoring the other boy. I actually came to offer you a gift, Nakumo. Akatani raises both of his eyebrows at that surprise. A gift. When Todoroki hands him the present, he isn't expecting 2 pink slips. For you and Yuri. Todoroki's elaboration doesn't do much to actually explain anything until Akatani reads what's written on the paper in his hand. Tickets to UA's sports festival. The boy can't help but feel some elation. He'd always seen the event aired on television, but never attended it in person before. However, his excitement is short-lived. He pauses when he realizes, wait, Yuri. Also confusing Todoroki. Oh, Shinso didn't tell you. Akatani's grip on the tickets tightens. He's not sure how many more surprises he can take right now. Tell me what? Todoroki's heterochromic eyes squint as he tries to make sense of the situation. Akatani glances at Himiko, not all that shocked to see her staring right back. She's the only one that knows the truth, but she knows better than to call him out if he lies. Despite what he said, he doesn't associate her with bad. He hopes that the trust they share will let her know that. Yuri's father took her to America. She tilts her head but says nothing, dissertation rights and all that. Your father? Todoroki's mood significantly darkens. Akatani swivels his head from Himiko back to him. He sees the Ghoul Quirk boy's fists are clenched at his sides. Dabi, as distant as he was, picks up on the change in attitude as well. Remembering Todoroki's past with his own father, Akutani's eyes can't help but be drawn between the boy's scar and Dabi's burns. She's safe. She's perfectly fine. He tries to sound assuring before allowing himself to succumb to his sorrow. I just miss her is all. You know. Noticing the change in atmosphere, as well as everyone's demeanor, Todoroki also calms down. Yes. He has a sibling amongst his brothers and sister that he misses too. Even Dabi ducks his head in the back, relating in some way or another. Sensing somber moods, Himiko tries to salvage the situation by jumping in the middle. Can I have the extra ticket instead? Her bright and bubbly act pulls everyone out from their sulking state successfully. Please, I really want to go. Oh, sure. Akutani hopes that saying yes might help make up for upsetting her earlier. It must to some extent, since Himiko stands on her tippy toes to plant a kiss on his cheek. Yay. It's a date. She cheers while snatching the ticket that she's claimed for herself. Dabi rolls his eyes while watching the entire exchange. Having had enough, he turns his back to them. I'm leaving. And announces his exit. Himiko teasingly sticks her tongue out at him, even though he can't see it. Oh, don't be such a sour seagull. And doesn't seem all that bothered that she made him uncomfortable. Returning to his stoic self, Todoroki turns towards Akutani to say, you have strange friends, Mikumo. Wanting to retort, Akutani opens his mouth. When he realizes that he can't, his shoulders sag and he sulks while admitting, I know. There are so many smells wafting through the air. Concession stands selling hot dogs and other meats alongside vendors that mix caramel or churn cotton candy. It's enough to make any person salivate. Through all those different promising tastes, however, the scent that the ghoul amongst the crowd finds most alluring is that of a mouse scurrying about. The rodent feasts on all the unfinished snacks people leave behind, nibbling on the litter. The ghoul runs his tongue along his lips, adopting that idea. Where nobody will bother looking, Akutani takes a detour into an alley. The overstuffed trash cans and overloaded dumpster had drawn the mouse away from the crowded festival. Out of sight and in the dark during the day, Akutani stops for a quick bite. Literally. He sinks his teeth into the mouse, fangs digging into flesh so easily. The blood doesn't just seep from the screeching rat, it gushes out in a rush like a bursted balloon. As though it too couldn't wait to get in the ghoul's mouth. The taste is bitter. Not sweet like a human. Akutani almost spits it out. Yet, it's better than nothing. He doesn't know if he could withstand the festival if he doesn't take this precaution. When a little girl had fallen and scraped her knee, he could barely hold himself back. A small snack to hold him over to his next meal suddenly seemed like a good idea to him. If a mouse is the best he could find on such short notice, then it'll have to do. Once he's finished, he wipes the blood smeared across his mouth with his sleeve. It'd be easier to explain a red stain there instead of on his face if anybody asks. Though he doubts anybody will if even Himiko doesn't once he meets up with her. The blonde latches onto that same arm, wrapping both of her own around it and squeezing. The seats Todoroki had gotten them are pretty good. They're just shy of the front row, but that's good considering the placement of the bleachers, and not having to worry about heads getting in the way. Himiko snuggles against Akutani's side, pushing his arm up and over her shoulders to wrap around. When the boy looks down at her with surprise, she feigns innocence with a smile that doesn't flash her fangs. Akutani blushes and licks away, but doesn't retract his arm. He's aware of how much they must look like a couple being so close together. Part of him wonders if they actually are. Having no experience with girls, he's not sure what their relationship status currently is. It's not like he can muster up the courage to ask her either. The two of them share moments where he thinks that she likes him just as much as he likes her, but he's too afraid to ruin their friendship. And considering Himiko's personality, he figures that's just the way she acts around everybody. He's grateful that the sports festival is beginning its first event, since that ought to take his mind off it. Classes are being called out onto the massive field where a wheel will decide how they'll compete. Akutani searches the crowd of hero hopefuls and other UA students, looking for Todoroki or Shinso. Instead, he spots someone from his childhood. Absent-mindedly, Akutani pulls Himiko a little closer to him, his hand gripping her shoulder a bit harder than it should. The small smile on his face is partially forced, but he can't help but admit to admiring his old friend. Of course Koch-chan would get into UA. The boy had been gifted with a quirk suited for heroics, and his tenacity makes him as equally perfect of a hero candidate. As a matter of fact, when the boy is called to the podium for having the highest score in UA's practical exam, he declares that he's going to win the festival with sincere determination. Himiko notices Akutani's internal crisis from beside him. She takes his free hand in hers, hoping to pull him back to reality. Feeling her soft touch, he does get drawn to the girl. His eyes gaze into hers, green staring into yellow. The compromised emotional state each of them share are locked away and hidden behind those lenses. For a moment, they allow one another to catch a glimpse of that vehemence. Akutani swallows, his mouth dry. Himiko's eyes are so similar to a feline's that they can sometimes seem predatory. They remind him of his own from time to time. He forces himself to look away, returning his attention to the sports festival. He's content enough with her soft hand in his rough one. So long as she holds him in place here, he doesn't have to feel like being out in public is a risk. Or so he hopes. When he hears Aizawa's voice through the stadium speakers, that helps to sober him up as well. He wasn't expecting Eraserhead to be a part of this year's commentary with present Mick. He partially wonders if Fieri is in the booth with them overlooking the show as well. He hopes so. He hopes she gets to enjoy the games and the performances from such a good view. Thinking of her and the underground hero makes him squeeze Himiko's hand. He has to stay grounded for all of their sakes. Losing control and letting himself loose here of all places wouldn't do any good. He sighs, slouching in his seat. Knowing how long the sports festival can be, he may as well get comfortable. Though the first tournament does go by rather quickly. That could have to do with the fact that it was a foot race through. That's where Todoroki had a face-off with Koch-chan, each of them using their quirks to cross the grounds faster than the rest of the racers. It was quite the spectacle. The crowd cheered and awed over the close finish. Todoroki had taken first place and Koch-chan second, wowing even Akutami. He hadn't expected his childhood friend to be beaten. Koch-chan never lost as far as Akutami was concerned. He could hardly believe his eyes that he had to rub them and blink back a few tears. Maybe times had changed. Maybe Koch-chan isn't the same kid that he remembers. After all, even he had changed over the years they split apart. When an explosion goes off down in the arena below, Akutami takes it back. Koch-chan still has a short fuse to go along with his dynamite detonating quirk. Though coming in first place, in the end, worked against Todoroki. For the second challenge, remaining players were given headbands with points based on their race placements. The less time it took to cross the finish line, the higher the number. When it's announced that to win the second round, participants must capture other people's headbands to earn the most points, Todoroki practically has a target over his head. Akutami winces, sympathizing with his friend. He doesn't envy being in that predicament, but does partially wish he could help somehow. The second round is a cavalry battle where players must partner with each other to make groups of 4. So at least Todoroki isn't alone. Akutami is relieved to see Shinso joining the team at the very least. Some pink-haired girl with a bunch of gadgets also willingly comes over to offer her services. Akutami had been worried that Todoroki would have trouble convincing people to work with him, but that doesn't seem to be the case. The game ought to go on to be an interesting one. All the teams rush Todoroki at once. Todoroki throws up an ice wall to shield he and his team long enough to fly away with a jetpack, shocking the audience. What doesn't surprise Akutami, however, is Koch-chan finding a way to pursue the dual quirk boy even when airborne. Koch-chan uses his explosions to fly after Todoroki, creating an aerial battle. Akutami leans forward, engrossed by the competition he's witnessing. Shinso says something that gets Koch-chan to respond. Then, the Insomniac's quirk takes effect. Koch-chan freezes up and falls out of the sky like a plane that's run out of fuel. Akutami momentarily worries that his childhood friend is going to lose or get hurt, but relaxes when the blonde's team catches him. It was a close call. Close enough that Koch-chan doesn't try it again. Unfortunately for Todoroki, his jetpack actually does run out of fuel. He and his team are forced to land. As soon as he does, all teams converge on him all over again. He tries freezing them all in place, but that only delays them briefly. He's forced to rely on the teammate he had joined him at the last minute. The tall blue-haired boy with glasses who has engines in his calves reveals a trump card. Those leg thrusters rev to their maximum potential before launching the team like a rocket. They cross the field to the opposite side in a matter of seconds, buying them some more time. It seems Todoroki's strategy is stalling for as long as he can. Though Akutami isn't sure for how much longer his friend will be able to keep that up. There are just too many opponents surrounding him with too long of a countdown to the end. Especially since Koch-chan is one of those competitors, blasting towards him at max speed. The blonde reaches for the headband, about to snatch it away. And then, Todoroki's left side ignites with flames. Koch-chan instinctively retracts his hand, avoiding the fire. And then redirects himself with his explosions to prevent crashing into the ground. Todoroki's flames recede just as quickly as they had appeared. The brief exchange has both of them shaken and Akutami even more invested in their match. He's not sure who to root for or what to expect from either of them anymore. Just at the height of the competition, the timer hits 0 and the buzzer sounds, indicating that the round is over. Akutami lets out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. A much-needed intermission begins, allowing Akutami to excuse himself. He goes to the bathroom to splash some water on his face, to regain control of his senses, to do something to keep himself under control. It's becoming increasingly difficult to regulate his instincts. So when he catches a whiff of blood, he nearly loses himself. His nostrils flare and he staggers back from the rush of adrenaline that hits him like a wave. Akutami's hand catches the doorframe, crushing the cement as he squeezes it like a stress ball. Akutami's vision blurs despite the enhancement that his Kakugan grants him. He covers his exposed eye with the hand that had been clutching the doorway. When he lifts his head, he sees the source of blood exposure. A familiar skeletally skinny blonde coughs into a napkin. It takes a moment for Akatani to remember. The man was a customer at Antiku. He must be sick. The boy swallows the saliva that's been accumulating in his mouth. The unhealthy blonde drops his napkin into the trash disposal before walking towards the exit. Akatani nearly trips over himself as he tries to get out of the way. The man is polite as he passes by. "Excuse me, young man." Unaware of the ghoul's desire to feed, Akatani wants to respond, to warn the man, but he's too afraid of what'll happen if he opens his mouth. He doubts such a sick person would be able to defend themselves if he loses control. A much younger blonde suddenly comes along to tend to the ill elder. The healthier human pauses when he spots Akatani, voice catching in his throat. "Are you alright?" He pays the boy no mind and returns his attention to the man who had been coughing up blood. Akatani internally wonders if they're related. Perhaps the older blonde is the younger one's father or grandfather, he figures. The frail father figure places a comforting hand on the fellow blonde's much sturdier shoulder. "I'm fine, young Tagada." But Tagada doesn't seem all that convinced. He reluctantly turns around to head back up to the bleachers, if you say so. Akatani backs into the bathroom, watching them leave. He's extremely aware of his heartbeat, and all the blood pumping through his veins to make it pound so hard. That was too close of a call. More than he knows. He nearly vomits from the amount of anxiety, but only coughs up some spittle. He's disgusted with himself. Disgusted that he nearly devoured such a defenseless man. Disgusted that he dug into the trash disposal to recover the blood-stained napkin. The quiet police precinct is a bad omen. The lack of commotion is reminiscent of the calm before a monstrous storm. It feels like the start of a new saga. Namasa closes the door to his office, hoping that it'll be enough for him to bunker down when the predicted chaos hits. The detective's tan overcoat and hat hang from a wooden stand, matching the man's demeanor once he plops into his seat. Even though Tamakawa ordered him a new chair to replace the damaged one, he can't get quite as comfortable as he'd like. The gooseneck lamp gives him a dim light to read over reports that still need filing. But he first has to resolve the case that came before those. He uses the landline phone provided by the precinct, dialing Eraserhead's number. After a few rings, the underground hero picks up. Namasa forces back a sigh of relief, expecting to have gotten Aizawa's answering machine instead. "I don't have time for courtesy calls." Aizawa's voice grumbles from the other end of the line. He sounds tired, per usual. Like he had just been woken up by the phone ringing. Knowing the underground hero, that's likely the case. Namasa closes his eyes, already frustrated with the man before they can even begin their conversation. Aizawa has a knack for giving him a headache. That's not exactly what I'd like to call these checkups, but they're mandatory. The detective chooses his words carefully as he broaches the reason for reaching out. "You're calling about the kid," Aizawa says matter-of-factly. There's an audible sigh through the phone before the underground hero grunts out, "I haven't heard from him." Namasa sits up in his seat, rectangular eyes opening wide. "You haven't?" His grip tightens on the phone. "Don't you find that the least bit concerning?" Memories of the Tokyo Ghoul case when it first started slowly creep their way into his thoughts. The excessive amount of violence. The devouring. When Namasa doesn't even hear the underground hero's breathing anymore, he presses the phone closer to his ear and asks again, "Aizawa." Aizawa takes longer than Namasa would have liked to answer. "This unorthodox approach was my idea. I'll take responsibility if he steps out of line." And his tone sounds much too reserved for such a serious matter. Namasa shakes his head, glad that the underground hero can't see it. It's evident that Aizawa developed some sort of emotional attachment to the boy. It's going to be difficult discussing the topic. The detective struggles to help the underground hero think logically as he too attempts to think straight. "He's not one of your students. He's a..." Don't finish that sentence. Aizawa's harsh tone cuts the detective short. The line goes silent after that. Namasa himself isn't sure what he was going to say about Akatani Nakumo, but he knows that it would have been regretted had he said it. Though grateful Eraserhead kept him from classifying a young boy as something more extreme, Namasa still stays staid. He swallows before saying, "Just don't forget the things that he's done." Though unable to see Aizawa's expression, the detective is sure that the underground hero will keep that in mind. Even so, Eraserhead doesn't assure him verbally, worry about catching real killers. Like Stain. The mention of another unresolved case gets the detective riled up. Stain is. But Aizawa is ruthless, in Hosu. You know where he's located and you aren't acting. A good number of heroes are assembling there to make up for our numbers, including Endeavor. Namasa grits his teeth and caresses his forehead in an attempt to relieve some tension. "You've never pushed this hard about Stain before. Did something happen?" "Ingenium." The underground hero's one-word response catches the detective by surprise. Stain's latest victim. Namasa recalls the incident report and even has half a mind to dig it up. He instead settles on asking more directly, "A tragedy, but what about him?" He shouldn't have expected the relation to be to the underground hero himself. Of course Aizawa's answer would pertain to his kids. "He's the older brother of one of my students." "Oh?" Namasa sinks back into his chair with a hefty sigh. I think he's going to do something stupid. He accepted an internship in Hosu. Aizawa's tone suddenly has a hint of urgency that sets the detective's nerves on fire. Understanding what kind of intentions those actions imply, Namasa is back to sitting up straight in no time, and you're going to let him take it. It'd do more harm than good to put that kind of pressure on him. He'd likely just go after Stain anyways. At least this way I can keep tabs on him. Namasa had almost forgotten how logical the underground hero can be sometimes. With how dramatic Aizawa had been between his emotions high and his conspiracy theories, he'd have never guessed there could be any validation behind his decisions. The detective slaps a hand against his face as he tries to resist moaning in pain, so we've got two problematic hits and the hero killer. Whether the pain is mentally or physically, he couldn't say. Aizawa sounds as equally strained but almost assuring to some extent. Let me deal with the problem child and Iida. You just make sure neither has the chance to run into Stain. Unfortunately, it's much too late to prevent such an encounter, and any assurement otherwise would be misplaced. Akatani's absence from Aizawa has sent him spiraling. Straight into the night, the ghoul's limbs spin with his twisting body. The appendages latch onto sides of buildings and pull him from ledge to ledge. The ghoul is present among gargoyles, stalking the night itself. And right there with him is another predator. The kind that hunts heroes. A self-proclaimed vigilante that utilizes a katana leaps rooftop to rooftop. He's just as starved for action as the ghoul is. He thirsts for the taste of blood on the tip of his tongue all the same. So when the two clash over the same prey that they had been stalking, it's to be expected. A low-level hero who had used his status to coerce a young woman into an alley where he could have his way with her. Both hunters deemed him worthy of their aggressive nature. He's now caught in the middle of their quarrel. The low-level hero cowers in the corner of a new alley, arms barely shielding his side of the violent battle. Stain parries two strikes from the ghoul's limbs like venomous vipers. He must fend off before moving with unnatural speed to avoid being impaled by a third. When he brings his blade down to go on the attack, it shatters under the pressure of a fourth limb. Stain stumbles before unsheathing a pair of daggers, ducking low under a high swipe of the ghoul's tentacles. He closes the distance between himself and his fellow predator, almost losing an eye, but instead being caught in ear. His opponent is fast too, avoiding an upward slash, but not dodging the second blade that nicks his shoulder. The ghoul reels back with a reflexive flick of its tails, when slamming into the hero killer's chest. Stain is sent into a brick wall, rattling whatever parts of his ribcage that aren't broken. He hits the floor just as hard, but doesn't allow himself to lose consciousness. Whoever moves quicker than the other is who will win the match. What determines the turnout is whether Stain will be able to use his quirk before the ghoul can reach him or not. The hero killer runs his tongue along the bloodied end of the dagger in his hand as the ghoul pounces. Without an inch of coiling around the hero killer, the ghoul stops. The blood-curdling effect of Stain's quirk grabs hold of the frenzied creature, holding it in a place of suspended animation. The hold that the hero killer has over the ghoul is a form of paralyzation. Such incapacitation became the hero hunter's natural instinct in his way of fighting. The same way a Komodo dragon bites its prey and then waits. The patient are deadly. Stain snarls at the grotesque features of the ghoul's leather mask, deeming it unsightly as much as its quirk. You dare to intervene. He searches for a reason or a shred of conviction within the chasm that is the ghoul's eye. Finding nothing in the void, the hero killer rips the ghoul's mask off to see what kind of face hides beneath. Only to be shocked by what lies underneath. A face much too young to witness or partake in bloodshed stares back. You're just a boy. The hero killer falters momentarily, but quickly recovers, shaking off the initial surprise. Explain yourself. His growl doesn't expose any sort of inner turmoil, nor does the blade that presses against Akatani's neck to usher a response. Whether it's due to the difficulty talking thanks to Stain's quirk or an act of rebellion, Akatani doesn't reply. The ghoul instead bares his fangs, the boy gritting his teeth together as he struggles to break free of the hero killer's quirk. For what reason? Foolish youth. Thrill-seeking. Stain doubts the interference of his hunt was anything noble. One look at the boy exposes his animalistic nature, an override of any proper sense or judgment. Through clenched teeth, the boy cedes. Can't help it. His lips don't move, but his words formulate just enough for Stain's hearing to catch. Move on my own. The hero killer's eyes go from laser-focused narrowed slits to broad and baffled. He rarely misjudges people and their intentions, but the boy's reason touches him in a way he didn't expect. The future pure-hearted heroes tell stories of how their bodies moved on their own to save lives. Stain begins wondering if the boy truly falls under that same category, fighting ferociously to save even a fake hero's life. Stain reconsiders that perhaps the boy is worth sparing. Little does he know that he completely misunderstood Akatani's angered answer. The boy's body hadn't moved to save the hero. It had moved to kill. To eat. The ghoul's starvation had reached a point so extreme that he could no longer hold himself back. When Stain leaves Akatani frozen in place, the boy considers himself anything but heroic. As a matter of fact, he starts worrying that he may be more villainous than the hero killer. The walls shake just as violently as the boy's bellicose body. With each feral swipe at nothing, there's an even more barbaric yell. Each cry is desperate, mercilessly clawing at his throat to climb out and escape. The pastry he had taken from Antiku in a futile attempt to pacify his intense hunger rises to the surface of his wide-spread mouth too. He staggers, nauseous. He knew this would happen, and yet, he's still surprised by the violent backlash. Akatani clutches his stomach, the pit already empty, and his craving returned. His hands tremble as they climb up from his gut to his ribcage, clinging onto his upper sides. His fingers run along the thin slots that are between bones, those slits feeling more defined than ever. His brain feels like it's swelling beyond the capacity of his skull, to the point that his starvation is too obvious to ignore any longer. These winded, ragged breaths coming faster than the cold sweat beating down his paling skin. Again, Akatani cries out in agony. His stomach lurches and gurgles. He raises his heavy eyelids halfway only for them to fall shut. The aching in his side surges upward to meet the pain in his skull. There's something about hunger that robs the spirit as well as the body, until the ability to fight is completely stolen from him. The boy bends forward, puking out a mixture of the aforementioned half-digested pastry and bile. Saliva streams out as well, dripping from his quivering lips. His thinning body tremors too, shrinking in on itself. He locked himself in after the incident with Stain. Unable to resist his extreme urge to not only eat, but to hunt and kill, he had considered himself lucky to be stopped by the hero killer's quirk. That is until after the hunted hero fled the scene, slipping away during Akatani's brief conversation with Stain, prompting Stain to leave Akatani behind too. All alone in the alley and unable to move, all Akatani could think about was how starved he is. His hunger increased with every passing second that he returned to his home in order to be reclusive, where he wouldn't accidentally harm anyone that didn't deserve it. The hot dog vendor on Sakura Drive would have been an innocent victim. Devouring the group of teens spending their night ding-dong ditching the neighborhood would have made him a villain, not a vigilante. The ghoul claws at himself, wanting to be let out. Akatani's ribs are truly a cage, and the bones are the less than sturdy bars. He twitches and wraps his arms around himself even tighter. Pastries won't satisfy him. Not even if Aizawa were here to erase his quirk. He's waited too long. It's past the point of no return. As though the mere thought of the underground hero is enough to summon him, Akatani's cell phone rings. The caller ID shows that it's Aizawa who is trying to reach him. The boy is unable to answer, the drool pulling out of his mouth, making it impossible to form a sentence. So he lets it ring. And ring. The insistent sound agitates him. It's like a bell calling him for dinner, but there's no meal on the table. Eventually, it ends. And the call goes to voicemail. Aizawa's voice filters through the phone as he leaves a message. Mikumo. You haven't been returning my calls. It's been a while since you last ate and I've recovered well enough that you should. Aside from that. A familiar younger voice interrupts, raising in volume with an added rustling, indicating that it's getting closer. The Katanai. The Katanai. Iri chirps like a bird singing a song. Iri really wants to see you. Aizawa continues as though the little girl hadn't just grabbed the phone from him. Akatani can hear the smile on the man's face though. There's a pause after that before Aizawa adds, I would like to see you again too. To make sure you're doing well. Akatani lets out a deep guttural growl as loud as his stomach's growling. The thought of Aizawa in front of him, a thin human, but a sack of meat nonetheless, the thought of flesh is enticing. Call me back soon. The underground hero ends the message he's leaving. Akatani fixates on the man's voice. He imagines Aizawa's throat. He imagines sinking his teeth into it. Eri would be with the underground hero too. She would run straight into Akatani's arms for a hug. It would be so easy to crush her. Like a boa constrictor or python, he wouldn't even need to use his Kagen. She's small, but she'd make for a delicious appetizer. The ghoul salivates as he fantasizes digging into her muscle tissue. Then, he stops. Akatani freezes in place when he realizes what he just pictured. The horror dawns on him. He had just imagined feasting on Eri. He had wanted to not only harm her, but to eat her. He screams more violently than he ever has in his entire life. He hadn't roared at the top of his lungs like this, ever since the night he devoured his own mother. Tears stream down his face as he pivots in hysterics. The room spins like his head as he stumbles around. Disgusted with himself, he throws his own body against the nearest wall. The impact leaves an indentation, destroying the sheetrock. He doesn't care. Akatani's Kagen sprouts from his back, tentacles whipping without rhyme or reason. The appendages are as frantic as he is. Fallen into a self-focused frenzy, he crashes into his table and shatters it. The tails swing so strongly that his body twists with them, and he's sent spiraling into the kitchen. Akatani slams into a counter, shattering the ceramic. He wants to destroy himself, but all that he's capable of damaging is his home. Everything easily breaks under the sheer force of his Kagen, but his body doesn't even bruise when he rams it into a piece of furniture. So he keeps screaming. At the top of his lungs, he yells out all of his pent-up frustration. The thought doesn't cross his mind that his neighbors may call the police, or a hero may come out of concern of the cry for help. He's too engrossed in his own self-loathing to do much thinking anymore. His mind races, overwhelmed by a series of screeching. He can't release the same type of terrible noise, but he comes close. The hunger is one thing, but the desire to harm the ones he loves is too much for him to bear. He already killed his past life as Izuku Midoriya. He doesn't want to lose another. Akatani sinks slowly, falling to his knees. His shoulders shake and his body crumbles as it's racked with extreme surges of sobs. Then, something soft grabs onto those same shoulders. The feeling is light. It doesn't add to the heavy weight leaning on them. Whatever it is, it's calming. A tender touch. Akatani looks up, trying to see through the tears obscuring his vision. What he sees is a blur. But he recognizes the shape. The blonde buns. The feminine form. Akatani's blackened eyes whiten, the corners cracking so much that the exposed red veins start to seep blood. At the epicenter of the dark void, each red iris shrinks as they focus on the subject in front of them. Himiko Toga. Her pale flesh ripe for the taking. All he has to do is reach out and take it. His fangs are sharper than hers. He can kill. He can eat. He can kill. He can fight it. He can resist the urge. Barely. Akatani's eyelids slam shut, closing as tight as possible. He seals off the sight of a perfect meal's beauty. It's a desperate attempt to make the blonde not appear as appetizing. But he can still smell her. Her scent is enticing. His nostrils flare as he inhales. Akatani shakes his head as hard as he can, hoping it flies off. It's just as difficult to formulate a coherent sentence as it is to hold back his instinct, but he has to warn her. Shouldn't be here. He grinds his gritted teeth as drool pulls out from the corners of his mouth. He barely hears Himiko trying to respond. She's probably been saying stuff to him all this time, but his other senses had overwhelmed him to the point of tuning her out until now. He tries to focus on the sound of her voice. Not the organs that make it possible for her to speak, not her slender throat. Just her words. He hears her words. It's okay, he stops listening. It's not okay. She doesn't know. He can't expect her to understand. He shouldn't blame her. But she doesn't comprehend the danger she's in. Akatani pushes her away. Or, that's what he wants to do. He just wants to distance himself from her so that she's safe from harm. He means to do so gently. Instead, he shoves her. He lashes out with a shout and tosses her across the room. Hearing her cry out in surprise, opening his eyes to see what he's done. His hands tremble in front of him. The same hands that threw her. He tucks them into his armpits, bending over so that he can't see her pained expression. He's afraid. Afraid that he'll hurt her. He already has. Akatani whines as he tries not to hurt her again. He turns his head away, trying to focus on something else. If he doesn't see her, he might not want to hunt her. That's what he hopes for anyways. His eyes land on the door. Its hinges are broken and it's wide open. Himiko must have kicked it in. She must have come by to check on him, heard his screaming, and broke in to make sure he's safe. Akatani lowers his head, staring at the ground. He made the mistake of thinking about the blonde again. Akatani. Himiko tries getting his attention. The boy covers his ears, attempting to block her out. Akatani. Himiko tries again, shouting this time. She grabs his wrists and pries his hands away from his ears, so that he can hear her. Akatani, look at me. She pleads. Akatani doesn't want to. He knows what'll happen if he does. He won't be able to contain himself. He'll attack her. Just knows he will. But that part of him wants to. It wants to attack. It wants to rip and tear past her skin. It wants to chow down on her intestines. The ghoul wants to look at its next meal. Akatani raises his head, no longer in control of his own body. He's shocked by what he sees. She's presenting herself to him. She's actually offering her neck to him. The left side of her cardigan is slightly pulled down, exposing her shoulder where a black bra strap is. She's blushing, but not like she usually does. This time, she's bashful. She's shy. It makes Akatani blush too. For more reasons than one, he's drawn to her. Bite me? Her voice is as tiny as her size, but it's also genuinely inviting. Akatani gawps at her, not believing what he's hearing or seeing. When her yellow eyes meet his dark voids, however, he feels a familiar sense of kinship that has him believing. He leans forward, part of him still hesitant and trying to resist out of fear that he'll go too far. But another part of him is unable to help himself. He wants to tackle her and go straight for the jugular. But he can't bring himself to do that to her. He has to hold himself back. He has to. Himiko is tired of waiting. She lurches at him first, striking suddenly. Her fangs sink into the spot between his own neck and shoulder, breaking skin and biting flesh. Akatani gasps in shock, and partly pleasure. It doesn't hurt as much as he would have expected, but it does catch him by surprise. It also does something to him instinctively. He's not just driven by an animalistic urge to feast or fight, but to bite back and assert his dominance. Akatani bites Himiko. Hard. She lets out a muffled moan, not releasing her own bite's grip. They both relish in the intimacy of the moment, sucking on each other's blood. The flavors that flow into their mouths. Akatani's RC cells and Himiko's sweet nectar. The ghoul had never tasted such blood before. It's like honey. Himiko is in a similar state of bliss. Akatani's blood is much better than any of the other people's blood that she drank. The two wrap their arms around one another, pulling their bodies closer. Neither wants to let the other loose, locking their jaws tight. Himiko's nails scrape Akatani like claws dragging across his skin. He too runs his fingers along the small of her back, like talons digging into flesh. Their moans increase in volume as they each share each other's blood. Bodies intertwined, Akatani's Kaguyan wraps around them both like a protective shell. Instead of tightening his hold, however, gently embraces the two. For once, Akatani doesn't feel so bad, allowing lust to overcome him. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to me, and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-ifs coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination. Goodbye everyone.